also Abraham Lincoln. And so those two people, he was thinking as anchors of those who were lifting up and acknowledging Black people for the richness, for the vibrancy, for the legacy that we bring. So I wanted just in recognition really quickly, we talk about the lights and we think about I have the lights on right above me right now. And just, that was invented by Lewis Latimer, 1881. So whenever we're moving around in this space, we're always seeing things and not knowing how they came to us. That was the light bulb. If any of us used an ironing board, some of us still do. There was Sarah Boone in 1892 that actually made it manageable and made it, usable, and it wasn't really clunky. And so that was Sarah Boone back in 1892. And then we have the street lights, the traffic lights. We all are driving. I was driving today. And as you're driving, Garrett Morgan in 1923 invented the traffic lights. Also the sewing machine and the gas mask that protects us. So those are just snapshots of contributions and recognition of what Black history, Black people have brought to this country, And on this day in 1869, Minnie Cox, an educator, became the first Black postmistress in the United States and was born in Lexington, Mississippi. So that's my shout out to my Mississippi friends here today, that our legacy continues. And they're going to do a land acknowledgement, but I'm sitting in New Hampshire, Wabanaki peoples, and certainly honor and value that love, that gift, that ongoing spirit that keeps moving us forward. So welcome, welcome, welcome. And again, this is only one of many to our first winter series session. Okay, Lisa's going to share a little bit of the tips for today and how to move through.
Thanks, everybody. Before we get started, I just want to share a little bit of gratitude for some of the folks that are making this series possible. We've got some great support from our allies at Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Foundation and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts Foundation, and also just a big shout out to our amazing long-term supporters of this network work, which is the Henry P. Kendall Foundation, the John Merck Fund, Angel Foundation, Garfield Foundation, and so many individuals and organizations, as well as in-kind support from the UNH Sustainability Institute.
I forgot.
Yeah. So wanted to also say just a few quick Zoom things. I know a lot of you have loads of Zoom experience. We're going to be using the chat today. So if you have questions along the way, thoughts, feel free to add them in the chat. There'll be various points along the way where we will be kind of pulling those questions as best we can and posing them to our guests as part of the conversation. We will be doing some breakout rooms, just brief ones to ruminate on some questions we're going to pose to you once we hear from our guests. There is a closed captioning, an automated closed captioning happening with this event and all the events. So there is a menu bar in Zoom that allows you to make that closed captioning visible to you or make it go away if it's distracting. But that will form a transcript, a written transcript that goes along with a recording that we'll share back to all of you after this event. And other than that, it's pretty straightforward. If you can keep on mute, that would be great. You can use the chat to communicate to any of us on the panel or on the organizing team if you need to. So that's kind of the backstory there. And Curtis, do you want me to jump right into a little bit on FS&E? Is this an okay time to?
Why don't I just do a quick grounding here, and then we'll go back to Lisa to say a little bit more about the network. For those of you who do not know FS&E, part of our practice when we gather, whether it's in person or virtually, is not to just jump into business. We know that the work of food systems reform is really and renewal and regeneration is grounded in culture, not just agriculture and not just fishing. And certainly our guests from Mississippi will speak all about that. So we bring various forms of creative expression to our gatherings, inviting one another to share our gifts. And so I thought I'd bring forward a couple stanzas from a poem which seems relevant to our topic today on the power of the network. And this comes from Marge Piercy. Karen Spiller and I are united in our common Michigan roots, and Marge Piercy is a Michiganian as well. And so these are her words, I think relevant to the power of networks. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. You cannot tell always by looking what is happening. More than half the tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. Penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree. Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden. Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar. Weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses. Live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving. Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in. A thicket and bramble wilderness to the outside, but to us interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and layers. Live as if you liked yourself, and it just might happen. Reach out, keep reaching out, keep bringing in. This is how we're going to live for a long time, not always. For every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes. So looking forward to the harvest of our time together this morning, and back to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Curtis. So we're really just so happy to have you all here with us today, the first of these 4 sessions. Many of you already know a little bit about Food Solutions New England, so I'll quickly say that we are a 6-state network. We're a multiracial network. We envision a powerful food movement that really transforms our regional food system around justice, sustainability, and resilience. I will also say that it's very values-based, as you've probably gathered, and our mission is to really unite this community around these values: democratic empowerment, racial equity, dignity for all, sustainability, and trust. And our role, our purpose, if you will, as a network is to strengthen this movement's ability to achieve those values, as well as this shared New England food vision, which some of you are familiar with. And just to reiterate, there are 4 key areas of our work. Today, we're focusing on network strengthening and the power of networks. And we, in the rest of this month, will be exploring our other impact areas, which have to do with equity and values, particularly racial equity at the core of our food system, shared narratives and communication strategies, as well as visionary policy for our whole region. And if you haven't already, there are more of these sessions coming up, so we encourage you to check those out and register when you can. And just to make a quick overview before we go right into it, I think most people have joined. We have a great number of participants here. And for those who are just joining, we are using the chat to introduce ourselves, places to put questions, thoughts, links, resources, sort of a side dialogue as we go through the morning. After we finish this opening, we'll be bringing our amazing keynote guests, or our key chord, however you want to think about it, into the circle. There'll be some discussions, both in small breakout groups and with the full group. We'll be having a break this morning, and after that break, we have some wonderful panelists from our own region primarily, although a little bit further afield as well, to talk about the power of networks in their particular food system work. We have a few announcements at the end, and then we'll take it from there. So back over to Karen and Curtis.
Great. And before Karen jumps in here to say a little bit more about our guests, just wanted to say a little bit more about this theme of the power of the network. So it was back in about 2011 that a number of people came together around a vision for this region, which we call now New England, which of course we know is made up of states on unceded land of indigenous peoples, and we continue to hold that complexity and that reality as we work alongside and in partnership with the indigenous peoples who are still here. And as we came together, looking at the fact that beyond division, we really needed to weave foundational connectivity, trust, familiarity, awareness, so that we could also lean into some of the very difficult conversations we must have if we're going to bring about a food system that is just, that is sustainable, that is more sovereign and democratically stewarded. And so it's been our ongoing work, and will continue to be in this next crucial decade, to weave critical connections across state lines, across race, ethnicity, class, other dimensions of difference, which we know are going to be crucial to resilience going forward. And we also know that a network approach is not just a panacea, that there are dynamics of power at play all the time in the human realm. And so we want to make sure that we pay attention very much to that reality. And so we couldn't think of better guests to help us walk into this, walk through this, than our friends from Mississippi, as well as our friends from the region and beyond, who will come in our second round. And so Karen's going to say a little bit more about them, and we'll dive in.
Thanks, Curtis. So this is our key chord. We really cannot say enough times how honored we are that you are here with us, stewards of Mississippi Food Justice Collaborative. They are a partnership of organizations working together to improve health outcomes for vulnerable children and their families in Mississippi, and catalyze systemic change in our food system through collaborative multiple levels. What's really important to understand is this work for them is hard work. You're going to hear it, you're going to feel it as they go through the musical chord and sharing and bringing us into their space and bringing their love into our space. So we have with us Sarah Medlock. She is a tribal member of the Mississippi Band of Kacha Indians and from the Bogue Chitto community, and has worked for the tribe for 20 years. And since 2016 has been the operations manager of the Office of Economic Development, coordinating new and educational and workforce development initiatives. She's one of the Food Systems Fellows and most recently joined the steering committee of the fellowship. We also have Liz Burchard Red, and is a New Hampshire native who is grateful to be making Jackson, Mississippi her home. She serves as a food justice project coordinator at NCAT Gulf State offices, and coordinates and co-coordinates the Mississippi Food Systems Fellowship and the Mississippi Food Justice Collaborative responsibilities with Asha and Noel. Now we'll meet Asha Tillman is Sustainable Agriculture Specialist at the National Center of the Appropriate Technology, that's the NCAT, and co-coordinator of Mississippi's Food System Fellowship, along with Liz and Noel. Felicia, we have this co-chord going on, this key chord going on. Felicia Bell is a Sustainable Ag Specialist in the National Center for Appropriate Technology, NCAT, and their regional office in Jackson, and is fourth generation farmer, founding member of the RD&S Farm LLC, and is fascinated by traditional agriculture strategies for all cultures, especially African farming and methods of techniques, and born into a family that sustained themselves from land with food. And we have Sunny Baker, is a co-developer and co-director of Mississippi Farm to School Network, and a member of the Mississippi Food Justice Collaborative here, and serves as vice chair of the Mississippi Food Policy Council. And we have Noel Didla is the immigrant from South India, making Jackson, Mississippi her home, serves as chair of the council and coordinates the Food System Fellowship and the Food Justice Collaborative responsible with that, with Asha and Liz. So you can see this key chord is always weaving, always weaving. We are so honored again to have you here with us and looking forward to this time together. But we're going to begin it and kind of anchor it and kick it off with playing a Chickasaw dance, walk dance, as a way for us to move in. So Curtis, can you give us a little bit of the Chickasaw walk dance?
Go we da ho ya le yo we da ho ya le ya we da ho ya le ya we da ho ya le ya we da ho ya le yo we da ho ya le ya we da ho ya le ya we da ho ya le yo we da ho ya le yo we da ho ya le ya we da ho ya le ya we
To give you a little bit of the dance narrative, as was the age of our forebears centuries ago, a series of dances were carried on throughout the evening and in the same order on each occasion. The walk dance marked the end of the night of dancing, which must be finished before sunrise so that all would be quiet as the sun rose. And I think that's very fitting to go into the land acknowledgements for the Mississippi um, Food Systems Fellowship that each of our area in Mississippi, which consists of the Choctaw Reservation, the Delta, Jackson areas, and the coastal area. I'll first start with Choctaw, and this is there are 5 people in each of these sections, and each got together to develop their land acknowledgements. Okay, so Choctaw, we acknowledge those that were brave enough to stay behind, paid the ultimate sacrifice. Through racism and adversity, we survived as Mississippi Choctaws. Our ancestors paved the way to our sovereignty and self-determination. Tribal leaders before their time may not have known it, fought for our education, culture, and way of life. The Delta, as a group, wrote, "We want to acknowledge the richness of the soil and the land in the Delta that was the ancestral home of indigenous people and was tilled and worked by enslaved African people. We make a commitment to restoring and regenerating the soil, making it more prosperous and accessible for ourselves and the generations that follow." The Jackson area said, "We as indigenous, African Americans, Latinx, women are Mississippians. We acknowledge the truth and legacies of white supremacy through policy that has impacted our food systems. We acknowledge inhumane policies such as the separation of families, mass incarceration, border policies, and public health." The coastal region said, "We would like to acknowledge the earliest people on this land who came before recorded history, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and the Creek, for the settling of this land and upholding the sacredness of this ecosystem. The enslaved Africans for leaving a legacy of a self-sustaining people. We are grateful for the love shared and generational gifts of culture and light by mixing of tribes and bloodlines in the name of peace." Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for that amazing grounding through the Choctaw walk dance and also through these land and people acknowledgements that our Mississippi Food Systems Fellows, who call themselves the Mississippi Food Systems Thinkers, have written, put their thoughts together, and have beautifully articulated what we are about. I'm Noelle Didla, and I am taking this moment to kind of weave us into this conversation together. And I would like at this time to welcome you all on behalf of Mississippi and kick us off again with Sarah, Asia's story.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, sweet. Good morning from Mississippi. Thank you, Curtis and Food Systems New England, for allowing us to share our stories and food systems work we're doing here in Mississippi. My name is Aisha Tillman. I am a native Mississippian born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi, with family ties to the Mississippi Delta. I began this work as an intern in 2019 with Liz Broussard, while learning the work of the Mississippi Food Justice Collaborative. I then met our thought partner, Noel Dilla, while planning for the Mississippi Food Systems Fellowship, which is where my grounding, knowing, and understanding of Mississippi food systems was anchored. I believe in doing principal work that values ethical leadership, economic justice, racial equity, food sovereignty, healthy communities, and environmental justice. I am also, I guess you could say, a rookie or newcomer in the game with Felicia Bell, as she is a true model and mentor to me in learning traditional ag practices, and to my growing expertise in small ruminant husbandry. I am happy and honored to share this space with Sarah Medlock, Sunny Baker, Liz Noel, and Felicia, as they are wise women who are leaders of this work and exemplify the power of nurture and care while doing the work to transform Mississippi food systems.
Sarah or Felicia?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I am Felicia Bell. I'm a fourth generation farmer, born and raised in Central Mississippi. We're considered a legacy farm, 5 generations, my 3 sons. This is documented, and they and our family have always been agriculturalists. I was born in agriculture and what most people today will refer to as homesteading. My family sustained themselves from the land with food and byproducts. Our farm legacy has always utilized the African traditional agricultural strategies and techniques. I am a co-founding member of RD&S Farm LLC with my oldest son. More businesses have been created from myself and my sons because of the love of nature, people, and giving service. Now as a farmer, fitting into the food system early on didn't really come to mind. But as I got more experience with our farm enterprises, then I started sharing my traditional knowledge with other limited resource farmers in the Southeast United States because they were drowning in debt. Health problems were increasing because of chemicals being used on the land and the food they were eating. And they had never made money off of their farm. The technical assistance I was doing in the South warranted me the opportunity to continue to spread my knowledge, but with a like-minded organization, National Center for Appropriate Technology, NCAT. So I always assist limited resource farmers. So over the 7 years being with NCAT, I've written many proposals that got funded to give these farmers education and financial resources by being the partner on these projects to provide their farm as a field day site, speaking to other farmers, and participating in other projects with NCAT. That brings us to the project that has us here today. I am so honored to have written a proposal and co-managed with Liz Broussard-Redd, the Mississippi Food Justice Collaborative, which comprises of organizations and farmer cooperatives that has mostly never been noticed for funding, but were doing the work in their communities. This project was the foundation for the Mississippi Food System Fellowship, which I am a steering committee member, and started a collaboration with the Mississippi Food Policy Council, which I am a board member. All of this work has brought so many people together in Mississippi that was doing the work, but working independently of a larger goal. Now we are one. And I am very pleased to be one of many initiated this foundational work that will be in Mississippi for years to come.
I will go next. I'm so sorry, I missed my turn. What I wanted to start off by saying is, in indigenous, being indigenous, of course, before 1830, Mississippi Choctaws were agrarian people, and they were farmers from the beginning. And then, of course, in 1830, after the Indian Removal Act was passed, 80% of the Choctaws here in Mississippi went to Oklahoma. Then the flu epidemic hit, and another 10% of the tribe was lost, leaving around 1,000 Mississippi Choctaws left in Mississippi. So we know about adversity, and we've struggled to come back, and how we did that, I don't know, but we've become and considered the top 10 private employers in the state of Mississippi. And I'm very proud of those before me that took it on and made a difference. I know that Liz Bouchard-Red and Aisha Tillman came to the reservation, the Office of Economic Development, and met with me and to try to get tribal members to join in on the Food Systems Fellowship. My boss talked me into join in, but I'm so glad that I did. And he said that I would enjoy it, and I do. I enjoy it very much. And it's a place of learning and growing. And I appreciate what Noelle, Aisha, and Liz have done. And Sunny, and everyone that I've met, Felicia, it's just wonderful. Now the pandemic has happened, and we've been meeting and collaborating online. And the only time we really did get to meet was when they came over. The fellows came over to Choctaw, and we celebrated, and we ate traditional foods, and we danced, and we made beads, and we went to the cultural center, and we took a tour of the reservation, and we all worked together and took a tour of the garden high tunnels and to look at vegetables. It was wonderful. With this pandemic, a lot of things have happened. We've lost 103 tribal members out of 11,000. So it's really hit our little tribe hard. Now that the presidential election is over with, I don't know. I think that I had come to realize that there are millions of people that do not think the same way that I do, and do not think the same way. A lot of, I hate to say racist, but that's the feeling that I have. And of course, in Mississippi, Philadelphia is notorious for the three civil rights workers. And we've come a little way, but not, I think we've taken a step back actually in this country. And so it concerns me greatly. But aside from that, I'm really glad that I've joined the Mississippi Food Systems Fellowship, and I'm so happy that they invited me to be on the steering committee. Thank you so much. And I just want to say that Chata Ahoya Siya, okay, which means I am a Choctaw woman, but now it's Okala Et Tihoba, which is we are coming together. And thank you so much.
Liz.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm just feeling so much gratitude right now to be part of this, this panel with so many sisters and friends who have been such an important part of my journey in moving to Mississippi and being engaged in this work. And I'm just so grateful for the ways that all of you, Sarah, Noelle, Aisha, Felicia, Sunny, and have uplifted me in this work and encouraged me in this work and challenged me in this work. As mentioned earlier in my bio, I'm originally from Concord, New Hampshire, and about 8 years ago, moved to Mississippi to serve with Food Corps at the time. And that's where I connected with Miss Felicia. And Felicia was the host site supervisor for Food Corps Mississippi and became a mentor of mine. Immediately, began introducing me to the importance of sitting with farmers across Mississippi, Black farmers, learning about the history of our state before engaging in any kind of food systems work, to really begin to understand the history of agriculture and to just talk and sit with farmers. And I'm so grateful for that orientation from Felicia. And when, as Felicia mentioned, when we began the Food Justice Collaborative work together, that introduced a whole new set of learnings. What began as a 3-year project, towards the end of that 3 years, we realized was much bigger than that and could be much bigger than that. So after the 3 years of really building relationships with some different groups around the state, so Milestone Cooperative in Holmes County, Mississippi, Choctaw Fresh with Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, Boat People SOS, a group down on the coast that works with Vietnamese fishermen and fisherfolk, the Mississippi Farm to School Network, Food Corps, and Hydra House. We're all working together to make different change within their own communities. But we also saw that throughout that project, that there were certain, there was a lot of work that we still needed to do as a group to really identify the values that were guiding our shared work and to really center those values in how we moved the work forward. And so around the end of that 3 years, I was connected with Noel Didla, and Noel really became a really important thought partner for me and an accountability partner for me in thinking about how to really center racial equity in this Mississippi food systems work, and helped really name some of the values that came out of what Food Justice Collaborative partners were already saying was important to them. So as a collaborative, we came up with a statement, some we believe statements about things that really brought us to the different food systems work we were doing, and beliefs that we really held dear. Things like, we believe all Mississippians should have access to healthy food. We believe that food and farm workers should make a fair price for what they produce. And Noel really helped us tease out some of the values that were inherent in these belief statements that we had come up with as a group, and then really try to navigate how to hold those central in anything that we do within the culture of the collaborative. So that turning point was around 2018 when we had a Mississippi Food Systems gathering that invited partners beyond just the collaborative at the time. And there was the Food Policy Council was in a process of kind of reinventing itself. And so the board was invited to this gathering as well as others. And Noel was an important strategist for that gathering to try to make sure that we were moving forward in a really responsible way and stewarding this Mississippi food systems work in the way that it needed to be. I will let Sunny take it from there, because that might be a good pickup point for you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sunny Baker. I've kicked my children out of the room. Hopefully they don't storm in at any moment, but that would be okay too. Thank you, Liz. It is such an honor to be in this room, and I love the way Liz put it, like my sisters here from Mississippi. So I'm a Jewish woman who grew up in suburban St. Louis, and I kind of lived all over the place, and then moved to Mississippi for a boy, which I was not incredibly excited about at the time, but little did I know that this would be just an incredibly transformational experience, and I would have it no other way. Mississippi has been an incredible place to live and learn and grow. I moved in 2012 as well. I've always believed that children and families are sacred people and know what's best needed for them to thrive. And that has guided my work in school food reform, changing the meals children receive in school cafeterias, which are often free and reduced cost meals, to be really high quality, delicious meals that include local foods as much as possible. So I've always done this work. I worked in Boulder, Colorado with the Chef Ann Foundation before moving here to Mississippi and working on Farm to School here. I have an incredible partner in crime with the Mississippi Farm to School Network. We serve as co-directors of the project. So Miss Dorothy Grady Scarborough, who I'm sure some of you know, is a native Mississippian and has been a Delta native her whole life. And we are a great team that work together to make this happen statewide. We work in every county. We do school garden work and local procurement work, and started off with the network in 2014 as a way to get what we called the team of rivals in Mississippi to work together. So it was a combination of on the ground work with people in communities and schools and farms, along with the state agencies that work on farm to school in Mississippi, which would be Department of Education and Agriculture, and a little bit Department of Health as well. We beat our heads against the wall trying to get everyone to work together and collaborate. And I will say that we have shifted over the years to being more people-centered, and are just going to have those agencies come along with us as they are ready. So we've done a lot more of growing of our own programming and of our own traditions, and encouraging schools to make this happen for them and make this happen for our communities here, buying local, doing school gardens. And now we have a huge home garden grant program to get families growing. We joined the Mississippi Food Justice Collaborative as founding members and could not have been more thrilled to join in on this group and learn from the people. I mean, last year we were on a fishing boat with Vietnamese fisher people, shrimping and eating shrimp like fresh out of the ocean. I mean, it's been a really enriching experience to connect with the different people in the collaborative, and there are more people yet to join that I know will be a very exciting future for us. I also joined the Mississippi Food Policy Council early on to my journey in Mississippi, and in a similar way to Mississippi Farm to School Network, we sort of started as a real kind of like institutional look at food policy in Mississippi. And we had like the big people players at the table for that council. And I've been on the board for probably 5 or 6 years of that group. And with the Mississippi Food Justice Collaborative's Food Justice Summit that we did 2-3 years ago, over the summer, we had a real transformation and a real shift back to the people and how we were going to best serve people. We totally redid the board, and I'm fortunate to get to have continued to stay on and help see this project. But I'd say one of the biggest things that we did was something Liz mentioned and is in the chat, was develop these values, beliefs, and principles collectively. And this just really guides our work. It helps us increase our people power and rely on those set of statements for all of our work moving forward. We are here to help Mississippians thrive, help ourselves thrive. And it's an honor to be a part of this group of sisters.
Thanks, Sunny, Sarah, Aisha, Liz, and Felicia, and those that are not here from the Policy Council, from the collaborative, and our fellows. And we are also thinking this work, this sacred work, right, is grounded in the truths and legacies of our ancestors. In this moment, I would also want to acknowledge the indigenous ancestors, Sarah's ancestors, Choctaw ancestors, And I also want to acknowledge Felicia's ancestors and Asia, Sunny, and Liz's ancestors, and my own ancestors. From the southeastern part of India. I'm from a place called Guntur. My great grandparents on my mom's side were field laborers. That's what the term was used back then. Uh, they were working in the field as laborers because they did not own land. And my great grandmother lived with us in a multi generational household until she transitioned to the next realm. And a lot of learning for me comes from this work. If I am informed in any way through Mississippi, it is grounded in the history of my caste community and the lived experiences of my family members that came before me, and also this knowledge that whatever we do, we have to ground it in ways that we are responsible for ourselves now, and that who we are in relationship with, and to make sure that our work informs what has to come ahead of us. And that's something my dad always taught me. He left us in 2004 to the next realm, and that was something my dad always said, how you have to believe in people, and you have to invest in people, and you have to invest in institutions, because you have to change dynamics of power. And I came here to Mississippi to work at Jackson State University, the Jackson State University, as an English instructor. And woo, woo, Felicia. uh, I worked there for 12 and a half years as an English instructor, and JSU students taught me how to. I came because this conversation is very people, place, and pivots. I want to focus on the pivots, right? So the people, besides my family, ancestors, and my son, without whom I wouldn't be able to do any of this work. His love informs me all the time to continue to ground myself and care for myself too. So the people, JSU students, are the people who helped me to love myself, because I came to America wanting to leave the place that has become toxic for me in many ways. And JSU grounded me. The Black history of the college grounded me. The Black students grounded me and held me. And the civil rights veterans who became mentors of mine, like Miss Frankie Adams Johnson, and Helen Chukwuma, mentor of mine from Nigeria, who was my colleague at Jackson State. She still teaches there. She continues to ground me. And then in this line of work, I also want to mention Akhil Bakari. He's a mentor of mine and a comrade of mine from the Malcolm X grassroots movement, of which I am a member of. And he grounds me. Arika Bennett, a former student and now a colleague and thought partner, she grounds me. And I definitely have to say Liz and Asia, who I work with so closely, and Sunny, Sarah, and Felicia, all of us doing this work together. This has been a beautiful relational work that we are building at the speed of trust. We have relationships that are personal, relationships with people who are connected to land, and relationships across our organizational space into the bigger collaborative piece, because at the end of the day, each of us believe that we want to transform Mississippi. We want to make Mississippi food sovereign. We want to make Mississippi stand up for the self-determination of Black people and uplift the sovereignty of our indigenous communities. And we want to ensure that the dignity of the Vietnamese community is upheld, and we want to ensure that our work is racially equitable, environmentally just, and is upheld by ethical leadership, and we want to make sure Mississippi is healthy through its policy. Mississippi is healthy through how it engages us as BIPOC people. So all of this learning came from the agrarian communities. All of this learning came from that space, right? When we had these conversations with people who are growing food, fishing, engaging in aqua, in oyster culture work, and people who are cultural workers in our community, poets, right, civil rights veterans, folk taught us, and then we are just carrying that, and we are trying to learn how to be stewards. We are trying to be stewards of ourselves and stewards of the various places we are part of, and we know we are experimenting through all these spaces, understanding that this experiment, even the resources we have to experiment, have to be held with such a responsibility, right? So we are holding us together as a sacred experiment. So I want to stop there. Maybe we may be out of time at this point, but mad love to Sarah, Liz, Sunny, Felicia, and Asia, and all our people with whom we are doing this work, because we have to free our land. We have to free the land by any means necessary. So this is the work we are doing. And we are very grateful to everybody with FSNE, Curtis, Elizabeth, and Karen, and everybody else who has worked to bring us all together. And wherever you all are joining us from today, thank you all for joining and allowing us space to share our stories. And this is the work of food sovereignty, and which is rooted in racial equity, is how we will change the game of power in this country and counter white supremacy.
Okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As this key chord continues, thinking about the culture workers, Noel, you're talking about the culture and changing the culture and lifting up the culture. And you said, your father said, our fathers are so wise and what they tell us and we hold on to. But about changing dynamics, the power dynamics. So maybe each of you can share a little bit about what that looks like. How do you make that happen? What do you need? What, we've heard you talk about values and belief and that connectivity and nurturing and caring. So share with us a little bit about when we're moving towards that dynamics of change and the power. What's worked for you? What have you tried on?
Yeah, I want to quickly start us off, and then others can take from there, because I'm supercharged right now. Uh, I was very nervous, but I'm supercharged now. Um, yeah, let's talk about the capacity building. I think we realize there are so many things we have to do. This all coming of people coming together is an amazing thing, right? And when you come together, you talk about these ideas, and you are so charged by what you see reflected in each other and everything. And then what happens is you realize you need resources, and then you need resources that are not, when you say resources, I really mean resources. People are resources, right? And then how do we value people through the lens of economic justice? And then how do we value labor of that people will put into the process? And how do you then bring in all the kinds of resources that are needed to transition and then move towards change and then sustain change? So there's a lot of work that has to happen, and transitions are not necessarily given the same amount of they're not valued as much as the big change or the intended change that we all want to talk about. We are in that transition right now. We are in that transition right now, and we are trying to make it as just as possible by leaning into the values. We name these things like racial equity, economic justice. What do those look like in operation? What do those look like in policy? What do those look like in governance? What do those look like in conflict? That is what we are figuring out. So what we decided was we need to build our own capacity of how we can continue to grow our relationships and how we can strengthen those relationships and how do those relationship work, how does that relationship work inform power, right? So we have started with the capacity building sessions. Liz, you want to talk about the capacity building sessions?
Yes. So since well, really since December, we've been working with a facilitation team with Curtis Ogden, who's on the call, as well as Dr. Sade Anderson, and a team of mental health care professionals from the Jackson area, progressive counseling, and to facilitate this series of capacity building sessions. And the latest one was on the different levels of racism that can show up in our work, from the interpersonal, the internalized, the structural, the institutional. And so that was one of the thoughts that came to my mind when talking about cultures, a resource that's been really beneficial to me in thinking about how white supremacy culture has shown up in, in my work, has been that tool. I'm sure someone in the chat can drop it, but it's the white supremacy characteristics handout that helps you think about, culturally, how does white supremacy show up in how we meet and how we, and in things like perfectionism and sense of urgency and some different characteristics. So I think that has helped me a lot, that resource in particular. But that capacity building session was great for us as a collaborative, as the fellows, as the policy council, to all be coming together to think about how racism shows up in our work, and how to begin to name that. So that was one of the capacity building sessions that we did recently.
Another thing that we are definitely working on is there is this work we have to do with each other, and there is also work that we have to do across. So, and this is like the first time we are being public facing. We've always hesitated around how we tell our story or even be in public spaces representing, because every time we thought about representation and it's a scary thought because we are very emergent, right? And we are very young as folk engaged in systems thinking work, and too many times stories can get romanticized and stories can get oversimplified, and we were also scared of how what we are saying might carry the weight of might not carry the complexities of all the truths and struggles, right? So we had to think a lot about what would that story be, what are those stories of all of us, and then how do those stories help with building across our region, our state and region, and then ultimately, how do our work inform human rights at the global level? So there's all this thinking that's also going into particularly, focusing on the narrative work. How do we change narrative? How do you shift narrative? And how do you transform narrative? And how does the ownership of narrative stay in your communities? So the way we do research also is very participatory. The people who are providing the wisdom are the ones that are going to be rewarded, not one researcher who takes that wisdom. So we have evaluators who think like that, and so who work with us, but we also are valuing our people in economically just ways so that everybody is an equal participant in this process. So these are all things we, again, figuring out, not have anything completely figured out. I just want to keep emphasizing that's what we are learning, and we're just sharing what we are working with, right? Our sacred experiment work. That's what we are sharing with you all about. I see a bunch of questions here. Curtis and Karen, lead us, please, from.
A lot is coming up.
Lots coming up.
Appreciation. Other links, and we're scurrying to keep up with you. Wonderful, wonderful information. I did want to just say that we're going to do this for about another 15, 20 minutes, and then we're going to invite people to break out into small groups to see what you're absorbing, meet one another, and see what questions you have for the guests. And I have to say, having had the chance to work with you all for several months, folks who are just meeting our guests for the first time, this is real. This is, I mean, the richness, the cultural commitment, the values commitment is just so inspirational. And so I actually wanted to lift up this question of each one of you have spoken to, I think, some of the challenge of working independently and building trust and simultaneously working to build a network across the state that also upholds community sovereignty. And how does that, is that a tension at all? I'm thinking, Sarah, in terms of what you said about going to tribal members and trying to convince them, right, to join various things. And so this idea that there is something you all can do together that you can't do separately, and yet you're also working for sovereignty. How does that come together?
I think that's very important. A lot of the older tribal members, the elders, don't do so well with changes and meeting new people, but the younger generation is that's exactly what they're doing. They're connecting with other younger people and other tribes across the nation, and we're trying to get involved with each other through USET, through other organizations, Native American organizations, and I think this is a stepping stone for us here in Mississippi to connect with each other in all the areas of Mississippi. And it's important to continue to communicate with each other, whether it's through video conferencing, maybe one day soon it will be back in person. And I think that's an important issue. And the sovereignty issue, that's always an issue, because I know that there is a tribe that had to give back their land. And then now I think it's in courts, but that's an issue. And how do you keep your culture intact? How do tribes keep their culture intact and yet advance where they need to be? And that's hard to do sometimes. But I think the connection is reaching out to different areas and with these groups and places and coming together to share ideas and pull them together into one so that we can make a difference.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other thoughts on that? Or what it takes, right, to build the trust in that rich historical context, which we also know is, fraught, right?
Yes.
Now, I was going to speak to the comment that Curtis made that we pretty much can't work alone. And the reason is because during the work, we've realized that this is so intergenerational, it's so multicultural. We just do better when we communicate, when we network together and we hold each other accountable, and we put our heads together to figure things out. I know Sarah said that the elders in her community have a hard time with communicating or getting hip to the newer things, but the younger generation are pretty much the networkers. Well, I'm pretty sure in the tribal communities, there's still historical context that's being passed down. And so there's that connection that we also have within the fellowship. Our oldest fellow is 65 years old and our youngest is 14. They're both on the coast and they're in communication with each other, doing different things within their cohort. And it's a beautiful thing. So when you say that, that statement, we can't work without each other, we literally can't. And that's a model that we're using moving forward, from the collaborative down to the fellowship and transforming Mississippi food systems work.
There are tensions that come because we're also learning each other's energies, right? So the tensions, for the most part, are healthy tensions and tensions that could be clarified for the most part. And there are a lot of times when we are on calls with one another and we can clearly kind of tell what the other person is thinking, and we will be texting one another. I'm like, isn't that what you're thinking? Because your face expression changed this way. And we are laughing about these things. So, but relationships are evolving, right? Relationships are evolving and they're growing. Tensions exist also because we are not well resourced. And so clear understanding and building a culture of transparency and is also very important. And also when there are groups that have been historically marginalized in one space, tensions also exist because of how voices can be dominant based on who's in the room. So there are so many ways in which tensions exist. I want to acknowledge that tensions exist, but because it's Mississippi is such a beautiful place where majority of what we do as BIPOC people is super relational. People hold tensions pretty well. And there are roles that philanthropy and people in places of power and influence play to sometimes inform those tensions in not so good ways, which is the reason why work has to be done relationally and work has to be done in ways that we know how to operationalize and practice these values that we speak about. And when that does not exist and philanthropy comes in and tells everybody you have to work together, and they have no idea of relationships and trauma, then things continue to fester. Healing, health and wellness and well-being are very central to how we are thinking about one another, how we are building with one another, which is why our capacity building sessions, just like Curtis and Sade, are so important as the facilitation experts. But Geraldine and her team are also equally important. And as coordinating committee, Liz Aisha and I, Curtis, Sade, Geraldine, we meet multiple times to ensure every aspect of how we build these sessions, design and build these sessions, are done with so much care, thought, and love and accountability towards healing and wellness also, because we want to make sure every voice has a place, every experience has a place, and we want to continue to center dignity, right? Human dignity of each and every Mississippian. So that's kind of like the other layer to what we are doing to understand tensions, humanize tensions too.
So this is, oh, Sunny, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just gonna add, Noelle reminded me of something that this healing has and growth has been painful at times. It's that like clean pain that Resma Monakim talks about a lot. But we have lost people in the process of doing this. We've lost a lot of people in the process of doing this. One of the biggest tensions when we were building our beliefs, values, and principles was this line that we will invest disproportionately in communities that are historically oppressed. We lost people when we were writing that line, and there was this real tension over what does that mean, and are we keeping it in, and it's certainly been a part of our growth. And just to say that growth is hard, and I think personally too, as a white woman doing this work, there is so much introspection needed as you're doing this. For everyone, I think for white people to learn, their ancestry, their history, just coming into this, just doing that, your own work outside of this to like really be who you are and learn why you are who you are in this space is incredibly important.
So Sunny, when you're talking about the clean pain, there is a point in time where people are not yet ready and they can come back. So, and they'll come back with a different spirit and a different intentionality, which will build upon what you're doing. So it's staying on course, as Noel says, unapologetic of that as you're going forward. You've talked a lot about, and you're not just talking, so know that you're being felt. You know, like feel every beat of that heart every time you speak. And we're talking about the thought partnership and the accountability partnership. And Asha, you said earlier about the ethical leadership, right? And we talk about equity leadership and we talk about, shared leadership. But ethical leadership is something more, isn't it? Can you share what that is and how you all have threaded it through the way you are building your relationships and your care for each other?
Definitely. Again, when you were asking that question, like boom, 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 three things popped up for me as examples. And ethical leadership is a practice of understanding that we are not perfect, and not being set on perfection, and being responsible and responsive at the same time, and having the honesty and courage to be in principled struggle at all times. Principled struggle is clear, and also understanding that as human beings, we are very much a complexity of all of our contradictions, all of our brilliance, and all of our self-doubts, and in any kind of trauma, right? All of that shapes who we are, and holding space for that and being graceful, all of that is very important to be ethical leaders. So one of the things I would say is Sarah has been onboarded to the steering committee only recently, but we had this written 2 years ago that we are going to be racially equitable. How did Sarah not be in that space for the last 2 years? And us to acknowledge that, and then onboarding Sarah, and having an understanding that this is one of the practices that we are learning, and being okay with that, that's one thing that I am thinking about as that pivot in ethical leadership. When I mean right before the pandemic hit, I think we got the grant from Kellogg to do some of this work. And as soon as the pandemic hit, we understood how folk are going through this. Challenges, economic challenges, right? Besides health challenges and wellness challenges. And so we immediately issued contracts to the team, facilitation team, in one check. We said, we are not going to piecemeal this. If we are truly about economic justice, let's release the money, because the relationship is already there. We trust these folk implicitly. We will do the work. And from that point on, it took us almost a year to build, but we did not hesitate once to lean into the relationship and trust. So that to me is an example of us trying to lean into our beliefs, values, and principles, and practicing it. I'm very proud of that kind of work we are all doing together. Felicia is our treasurer, so we kind of talk about these things, Judy, Felicia, and I, and then we move the monies. It's like all of us are learning, and it's a struggle to explain it to each other in the context of the struggle, but we are learning to get it, because we are learning to trust and also understand each other's styles of operation. And there are ways, I mean, the way I say things sometimes, it's very kind of Telugu to colonized British to my own version of being in the South, kind of all these cultural translations that happen and come out in the form of the way I use English. And then, you know, people learning to be okay, the way Asia expresses herself, the way Liz, all of us learning to be okay with each other's energies in the space, right? And so, and when Felicia keeps bringing us on track about, so how do you want to do this? Or Sarah asked the question about, isn't that the next step? Sunny is like, what about policy? So understanding each other's strengths and all, that to me also speaks about the ethics of, you know, this work and leaning into practicing and being okay with critique and suggestions and seeing each other as collective in the space, right? So that's kind of like those two examples speak to me, Karen. And thanks for that question.
Oh, but thank you for the richness of the answer, because as you said, there's so much in that we got so much from that.
Karen,
And
just before we go to the small breakout rooms, I just wanted to just in the same spirit come back to Felicia, what you were saying earlier about you know, the independence, and now we're coming together. And given the amount of time you've been in the food system as a grower, as a producer, what is making that happen now that you feel like is different now than what has historically been true?
Really, people want change, and it's across the board what I'm seeing. Many years we have had and continue to have in some sectors. You have so many people talking about limited resource farmers, but those farmers are not at the table. And so that's have always been my reason for being here. And then also this project, making sure those farmers that are always spoke about, and policies are trying to be written for. But I'm a firm believer, you get it from the person, you get it from the entity, you get it from the people that hardship they're going through the hardship. No one else can feel that and speak to that. And so I feel like the change is coming and it was way before the pandemic. The pandemic really have shown, I feel like our farmers, our activists, that we were going in the right direction. We had started and start moving into the right direction. Now we just got to lock it in and get firm on that and work as a collective. And as Noel said, it's going to be some growing pains, but we have to do it. Mississippi, the historical context have not really been favorable for small farmers to be successful. And so this is why I'm here, because I feel like this particular system is for all, and not just a quote unquote big ag in our state. And so that it's just a change. People want to see a change, but they want to see positive change, and so forth. One of the things, if you don't mind, Curtis, can I add something about the farmers? Is that okay?
Of course.
Just quickly, reason why I emphasize the African tradition, as most of you all know, for as I enslaved Africans, everything was stripped. Our knowledge of everything was stripped, but our ancestors were brought here for agriculture. And so what always puzzled me growing up was, why were we at the bottom of the totem pole when it came to agriculture in America? And so I had to, grow into that, being with a lot of elders growing up and seeing what was happening. And then when I was able to really put my voice in front of that. And so that's why, because as I was growing up and so for so many years, I saw our farmers specifically being taken down a rabbit hole. That's kind of how I describe it, because they were not directed and steered to be on the main course, the main driveway, the main street. And I didn't like that. And so the reason why I always emphasize African traditions was because I wanted our elders to go back to what they knew, and that would sustain them always. It has sustained various cultures around the world for thousands and thousands of years. And when you don't leave that, you can sustain yourself. But when we're led to leave it, then we come into this thing of, my whole life I saw farmers not making not one penny off their farm, but they had amazing gardens and farms and they weren't making any money. And I just could not understand that. So I just wanted to add that piece, why it's so intricate, because our farm, for whatever reason, our generations never went away from it and was always taught to never let anyone take you away from it. And that's what I wanted to teach other farmers, to be firm on that. And it's okay to be firm on that.
Thank you.
Karen, sorry.
Curtis, you're going to take us on to the.
Yes, well, this is going to be a pause, as I feel like I'm stealing your line, Karen.
Get.
Not the end, but a pause. So I know this is a lot to soak in the richness of this. So we wanted to send you all into small group breakouts of about 4 or 5 people. I think it is true, Lisa, that our panelists our guests will stay with us in the main room and everybody else will go into small groups so that you can meet each other. So for 15 minutes, we're inviting you to introduce yourselves. Who are you? Where are you from? Anything else you want to share? And then what's coming up for you as you take this in. When we come back, we'll field some questions. We're acknowledging there are a lot of questions in the chat about funding and about governance and about how you work against white supremacy in truly multicultural, multi-racial spaces. So we're flagging all of those and whatever else comes up. So Lisa, you're gonna do your thing.
Yep, here we go.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope that you enjoyed getting a chance to meet one another in those small groups. So that's both very intentional in terms of continuing to weave connections, not just here in the region, but beyond, values-aligned people focused on food and food systems, but also to see what questions you have that have been coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So we're inviting you.
I just wanted to let you know that some of them are talking out their final 60 seconds. So in about 10 seconds, you'll have a big flood of additional people.
All right, so don't pay attention to anything I just said.
No problem, no problem. We'll hear it again.
Hear this message repeated shortly.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, now we're going back in numbers of screens here. All right, so for those who are now joining, I got started a little bit early. Some had come back, some used that last minute. So again, we want to use those big breakout groups to give you a chance to meet one another, values-aligned people who are doing food systems work. And we'd love to have you throw out any of your questions that you have for our panelists. Clearly, we will probably not have time to get to them all, but please go ahead and put those in the chat. We also went back through the chat and we're pulling out some threads. And Karen, do you want to frame the question around funding and cultural contract?
Absolutely, absolutely. We were talking, and it came in one of the chats, but talking about funding. How do we fund our work? How do we make sure that economic justice is happening there? And the question I had for my friends here was, how do they do that? You know, we talked about culture, holding people close, the accountability, the values, the beliefs. How does that all work when we're talking about funding and funding relationships and funding being true to our values? Mm-hmm. So why don't you share with us how you balance that, how you manage that, and what tools do you use?
Sunny, you want to go and then I can follow up?
Yeah, I saw that question come through and it really resonated because I was always that person to say, this sounds great, but how do you fund it? Type thing. And I think to reflect on that, and of course it's one thing to like talk about it once we've received funding, but I do really think it was much more about building the leadership first and the teams and sort of coming together and developing these values and principles and beliefs and learning how each other worked and sort of what we wanted to be. That was a really important stage before we sought funding, received funding, anything, because it had really never occurred to me until I started with the Food Justice Collaborative to even push back at funders. I've always done nonprofit work, and I've always been like, well, if they're giving me money, I'm doing what they're asking me to do. But something I really learned through being with this group is that no, you set your values, you look at what your people need and what you're trying to do, and then funders come. That's sort of the stage, and funders are partners, and you see them as partners. I loved the way that the funders were introduced as a part of this session today as partners, and as those partners, that they are held accountable to the, you know, to the values and beliefs and principles of the organizations that they are funding.
Thanks, Sunny. Uh, yeah, following up from where Sunny has transitioned, uh, uh, I would say that example is the relationships that we have in Mississippi. One of the relationships is with a person who has only recently become a funder with Kellogg, program officer with Kellogg. But before that, I've known him, and several of our my sisters have known him for a long time. This is the person I marched with. This is the person I was protesting with. This is the person we cook for one another, and we celebrate together, and we mourn together with, right? And that relationship is key. And I want to recognize that in the larger understanding of philanthropy. And This person has worked with us. This was like literally in the process of how we were doing this work. Liz and I were working at the house one day, and we were working on this proposal for, after getting feedback from everybody, we were meeting at the house and working on this. And then suddenly we were like, why don't we call Jed? And we called Jed, and Jed like, are you free? Come to the house. And he came by, and then he just asked us to continue moving, building, and then we got the funding. So that's I want to say that kind of honest relationships are, and community centered relationships have been very key to how we have engaged with funding. Sunny introduced me to Linda Jo in Chicago at a gathering where I actually met Ann Palmer also. So at that gathering, we met Linda, and then Linda was talking about how much she heard about our work through Sunny, right? And then we began this relationship with Linda too. So, and there, and through that, I would say so far, we have received several grants. The Policy Council got a grant, the collaborative was funded. And then this work we are getting ready to do with Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, that also got funded. But one thing I would say as part of that is there is philanthropy that's very mainstream, right? While we are building these relationships, definitely walk the walk with them as if they're partners that are equally accountable. Do not ever think of them above us because they have money. Money is just one way of engaging in changing the dynamics of our communities, right? It is a resource, and we deserve those resources, and we should absolutely self-determine those resources. So we have to inform how funding and philanthropy has to be radicalized. And I'm very proud to say we are actually doing that in relational ways, and asking them to be principled. Like, they have so many expectations of us. No, actually we need you to do this. So we created a cultural contract, and our cultural contract names every aspect of relationships. If you are an academician, if you are an artist, if you think you are an icon, and if you believe you are so and so. We named so many categories, and we are constructing this cultural contract, and we are saying these are our beliefs, values, and principles. And when you navigate us, we want you to absolutely um, move in this principle struggle with us. So that's kind of like, I think we should absolutely self-determine how we build relationships and inform the change of power, because if we do not, you know, the community dignity will never be held in all its integrity. Because anybody from the outside with resources, we are all hungry for resources. We all need resources. That doesn't mean folk can change whatever fancy language they want to put into proposal development and we all want to change our dance. That is so, so harmful. We are not doing that. This is our language. This is our process. Why don't you listen? Because this is what our land is saying, what our people are saying. Be strong about it. They will give you money. They're giving us money. So do not stay principled. Make sure the integrity of your people and organizations, and also always people over organizations. Ensure that people are always upheld. It's not the organization. Organizations can come and go. We all know the history of nonprofits, and you know, yeah, and why funding comes the way it comes, right? Decolonize. We have to decolonize.
Well, thank you. There's some questions here. Of course, there's a request to have a copy of the contract, a sample of how they can mirror that in their own places. Absolutely. And it's also a shift. It's certainly a shift in the way we think in our relationships with our funders.
We are working on it. Once we are at a place where we think our language is, more succinctly representative of all of who we are as BIPOC Mississippi and Gulf South, we will definitely share it through FSNE because they are our partners and have been amazingly responsive partners to in this line of work with us. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I can add a quick note on the cultural contract as well. And I think Noel mentioned this, but just to highlight it, and that contract is to be used with folks even beyond philanthropy and funders, that for in terms of any partnerships that we could pursue as a collaborative, that contract would be expected of academia or of the media outlets in our community and a variety of folks. So we are looking at that kind of more broadly. And in the meantime, one thing we've been doing while we work on the language in the contract, we have with new partners, we've been sharing our beliefs, values, and principles document from the beginning to first show, hey, this is where we are. Are you on board with these before we move forward with anything? So that has been kind of a temporary tool that we've been able to use as well in terms of developing new relationships, especially when it comes to funders and the three I mentioned, academia and storytellers or news outlets.
There's a series of questions that have come up, and I think you've been talking to this collectively about, what are the specific practices of trust building? I mean, I think a lot of them you're demonstrating just in your storytelling and some of what you lifted up. And then a very specific question about, onboarding or bringing new people in and what's worked and what hasn't. Sometimes we learn what to do by learning what not to do. So curious, what lessons have you learned around ways to build trust, to bring new people in, new partnerships? What have you learned not to do?
Asia, Liz, Sarah, and Felicia, and Sunny.
I think that when I was able to meet with all the fellows and they had come over to Choctaw and I got to meet everyone and listen to the speeches and the guest speakers that were there and how they felt. And I just knew that this was their truth. This is what they wanted to have done. This is what we were trying to do. So it was easier to get together and build upon that, and it's still building upon that. I'm brand new into this, really, and I just think everyone there is just so awesome, and I think that this is going to be a good relationship for the future.
one of the things that I just have noticed over the years is just bring everyone in, but your organization or whatever you're working within has to have a foundation. And so when you have a foundational environment, then those people coming in will stay with you or not, you know, because they'll feel something within their heart to say, this is not right for me. But that has to be already in place, be very strong. And as Noel and everyone spoke of, it's the values. You have to have core values of the organization, but then each individual person have to have core values, what they're not going to waver on. And it's very easy to bring in people and know who's your tribe and who's not.
Alicia, thank you for that. Who's our tribe and who's not? And there's a question here still about what are resources? How do you bring people in? What kind of structures? I mean, even we have a foundation, and then sometimes we're resistant to structures, but we do need structures within to work, kind of our guidelines, our policies and practices to hold us together. So there's a question here about what kind of structure would you, or do you use for your collaborative teams and committees?
So there is no set structure because, as I mentioned before, we are learning to grow at the speed of trust. So I should say relationships and trust are the structure that we have, and with each other, and being always okay with, like, vulnerable with each other in this group, I think is very key. And also acknowledging, being truthful and honest, right, about each other is so much, has been key. Like when we have, any kind of tensions that come, sensing those energies and actually naming them, and being okay with pushback, and allowing each other to push each other back, and making space for that to sit and reflect upon it collectively. And that has been okay when we come together, chart paper, whatever we are writing and working. We couldn't do that during this time, so we do that on Zoom and all. But and making space for those tensions to come into the space instead of being in denial or not addressing them, that is structure. That is structure to me, because to us, it is how we were talking about ourselves as the key chord, right? When Curtis introduced this idea of, do you want a keynote and all, we said no, it'll be a chord of us. It'll be at least 5, 6, 7 of us, because there's nothing that one person can speak to, because there's so much that each of us are holding. And it's not just us who are here. We're only here because we are allowed to be here. So, making sure that of that, right? And we are very evolutionary. Like, we do not have a plan. Whatever we said in the proposal is what we said, right? But making sure that we are resonating with what is evolving in our people, and then moving through all the social changes that BIPOC communities have to navigate, and then ensuring that we are holding space that as stewards and trying to nurture with trust. So that is kind of being our process, and making sure that all of our cultures are equitably informing our evolution. So that's kind of like has been the way we have been operating. There is no big structure. We are the structure. Our cultures are the structure. Our trust is the structure. Our sisterhood is the structure. Our camaraderie is the structure. The legacies of our family's truths and ancestral energies, they are the structure. Our spirituality is the structure, if that makes sense.
It is. It is. It is. The structure is you and all that you're building in those relationships. It's so critical to hold that center. Hold that center. And I think that goes back again to the cultural contract. As Liz said earlier, it's not external, but but it's how you hold each other close, and that accountability and that responsibility and responsiveness that you all hold each other close to. And that is probably one of all the things we're talking about. Love, the trust at the center is the most important thing that we should be walking away with, and understanding that we have to take time to build that trust and hold each other close as we move. But don't move and not think that that's not important to hold close and give attention to, give love to, nurture, feed, as Felicia would say, put the water on it, put the sun on it, and keep it growing.
Absolutely. And it's very, very, very resonant, I think, with the FS&E experience, where it's dizzying how our structure has changed over 10 years. It's like every year we're refreshing it, but what hasn't changed, and quoting Niaz Dori, who may still be with us, you put dignity at the center. You put dignity at the center. And of course, each year that looks a little bit different, depending on the level of trust and now who's at the table. And so it just has to evolve, evolve, evolve. So I know we've only got about 5 minutes left, and we do want to end on time to give people a break before our guests join us this afternoon. Some are already here. I wonder if we could close out by just hearing from each one of you, just a final word. What would you like to leave us with? Wisdom, question, lesson, encouragement?
I can go first. I would say get comfortable being uncomfortable is a big piece of this. And if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to move to Mississippi, look at what they're doing, it's so wonderful. First of all, you do, because it is so wonderful here. But second of all, like, this is something that can be done anywhere and is important to do everywhere. And we are very much in the growth stage. I think we talked earlier about how we are not, we haven't reached like a pinnacle or anything of this work, and we're still learning and growing along with the rest of you. But it's so incredibly important. And as Sarah talked about in her intro, like, now is the time. It's as if we've hit this like breaking point in our society, but also this like opening at the same time, with everything that's happened over the summer, with the murders, and with, you know, what's happened with our political structure and system. This is our opening. This is our time to like gear up, start going, moving fast, but at the speed of trust. And I'm incredibly grateful to be along on the journey with my Mississippi gals and with all of you.
I just want to say, don't be afraid to take that first step. Need to take that first step. If you're thinking about working with younger kids and older people as an intergenerational garden project, do it. And if you don't know who to contact, reach out to someone and start. Just go ahead and start, because we are in the middle of change. This is huge, and we need to go ahead and try to do something now. And just to reiterate what Sunny was saying, you know, let's take that first step and let's move ahead, because we are politically, socially, we're in change. And I am so thankful that Noelle, Aisha, and Liz, Aisha, thank you for coming that day, and keep calling me and things like that. And Noelle, you too. I'm just so thankful for you, and Sunny and Felicia. I've just met y'all, but you know, you're awesome. And so I just hope that we can just make something happen that's going to benefit a lot of people.
I have a couple things. I think the first is know your values. that there are so many little arms and fingers of this work that are easy to get swept up in. You know, like I remember points in time, I've considered myself a sustainable agriculture person, or I've considered myself a healthy food in schools person, or, you know, there've been so many different periods of time where I've been passionate about different things. And the past few years have been the most rewarding time of my life and the most growthful time of my life, because I've been able to really find what I believe in and be able to stand up for something in the work that I do. And then the relationships have followed, and the relationships have pushed me in that direction. So I guess the part two to that is also seek accountability and build trust. Because I would not be able to keep doing this work if I didn't have these amazing ladies around me and the broader network that we get to work with, to continue to deepen that practice in my values. So I just, yeah, know your values and seek accountability and build trust.
I would like to just tell everyone, economic justice is in your wallet. So I would ask each and every one of you to purchase from a local farmer in your area, a small farmer. And then also tack on being very conscious of purchasing from a BIPOC farmer. So that's something that you could do, is you have the control. You have the control. And so just choose it wisely, and that can really change what we're doing in our food system.
And I would say for me is do your own personal grounding, become one with the work that you're doing, resonate with it, truthfully at heart and in mind. Also uplift the skills and the people that are around you. We are not all alike. Sometimes we don't all believe and value the same things, but the work in itself should have the same value, beliefs, and principles around it. And so when you uplift that, and then you also uplift the people who are doing the work that are skilled in certain areas to do that work, it all comes together, and you do that with love and nurture and care and resilience.
I echo all of my sisters, and we started with a Choctaw, grounding. I want to end with a Mississippi Black grounding again. Kiese Lehman, if you don't know who he is or his writings, you need to get to know him. Kiese Lehman is a Jacksonian and a Mississippian, and Kiese Lehman in a conversation once said, they were asking him questions about how do we transform public school systems to be equitable, and his response was, Black kids, Indigenous kids, brown kids, kids, period, deserve all of us to think about them deserving good love, healthy choices, and second chances. I want all of us to think about that. What does good love look like in food system transformation? What does good love look like in the work that we do towards building those systems, changing those systems, right? And what does making healthy choices look like? And how do we give each other, our communities, and the world a second chance? Because we have to build for the children yet to be born, and it has to be in tune with how we are informed by our ancestors, and that is how we free the land. And thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
I know it's gonna sound crazy, but just go with me, right? I remember this one time
Well, everybody, our beloved Mississippi guests, thanks for being with us. We're gonna keep this channel open and the music going. Again, this is a musical selection from our guests. Thank you so much for all the gifts you brought and all the inspiration. So feel free to stick around with us, talking to our guests and certainly everybody else. We have amazing guests beyond this as well, from NAMA, from Vermont Farm to Plate, from the HEAL Alliance. So we'll start up at about 1:15.
Temperature wasn't rising, it was a comfortable climate. I looked down and saw water surround the islands. And I looked back up, cause I ain't friendly with heights, but you don't get to change your mind when it's already high. Sorrow was like an echo, almost out of ears range. Feeling nothing is normal, feeling pieces would feel strange, and I ain't understand it. Understood I wasn't supposed to. That was the beauty. I read the stars and they told truth.
Thank you, Curtis, Karen, and everybody.
I met Joy when I was kind of tired. She said if she had to rely on humans, then she would have been retired. I laughed at her choice of smile talk. She crazy, she the sweetest of the fruits. Honestly, amazing. She never rests because she said she was sent by God. She's stronger than she looks, she really fit for the job. She fit for my heart. I told her not to worry about me too much, as long as she around with peace of mind and not be too clutch. Depression tried to be my tour guide, but that ain't sit with me. Besides, in this realm, he a figment of distant memory, like the lingering taste of food already digested and experienced, but I'm not truly invested. I feel the pressures of the other world returning. My mind and body felt tension. It was nice to float away. Can I earn another ticket? Okay, I'm happy. I'm happy with this. I love it so.
How we initially got to know him, a national coalition of food workers. Currently, he's the campaigns director at HEAL, which is the Health, Environment, Agriculture, and Labor Food Alliance, which is a multi-sector coalition representing over 50 organizations in food and agriculture. And FS&E is very grateful for the work of HEAL as we've adopted the HEAL policy platform as something to guide our efforts towards holistic food, farming, and fisheries policy in this region. Secondly, I want to introduce you to Sarah Danley, who is with the Vermont Farm to Plate Network, a very robust statewide network just north of where I am right now in Western Massachusetts. Sarah is the network manager for Farm to Plate, where she supports many, and I will emphasize many groups that are affiliated with that very robust network, including food access, education and workforce, farmland access, and more. She has a background in environmental and land use law, community health, and the arts, and she happens to live on a sheep farm where she's helping to develop a new orchard operation. And then lastly, welcoming Brett Tolley. Brett is the National Program Coordinator for the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance. He comes from a 4-generation commercial fishing family out of Massachusetts, and he's been involved in network and movement building efforts for the past 15 years. Brett, along with his colleagues at NAMA, is always good at reminding us that when we're talking about food systems, it's not just the land, it is also the sea. It's not just the farms, it's the fish. So welcoming the three of you, thanks for joining us for a continuation of this conversation about the power of networks. Wanted to invite you each to say just a bit more about the network you're here to represent. and then we'll dive into some questions. Jose, would you be willing to start us?
We don't have Jose here just yet, so we might want to.
All right, I wasn't sure if it was a function of the highlight not working or the spotlight. So we'll move on. How about Sarah? Want to say a little bit more about your network and you?
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Curtis. So a little bit of background on the Vermont Farm to Plate Network. So back in 2009, the Vermont State Legislature created the Farm to Plate Investment Program. And in that program, they tasked my employer, the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, with leading the development and implementation of a statewide food system strategic plan. The legislative goals have been revised a little bit since then, but what they are currently, which is very close to what they were at that time, is to increase sustainable economic development and create jobs in Vermont's food and farm sector, improve soils, water, and resiliency of the working landscape in the face of climate change, and improve access to healthy local foods for all Vermonters. So in 2011, the first strategic plan was released and the Farm to Plate Network was formed. So we're now a collective impact network of over 300 businesses, organizations, and individuals. The groups are fluid. Some have merged or separated over the years, but generally we have about 11 to 12 permanent groups that meet regularly, and then they spin off shorter term task forces when they undertake project work together. The original plan that was developed in between 2009 and 2011 was a strategic plan that went through 2020. So given that, we've spent the last 2 years developing the new strategic plan, which will actually be released this coming Monday, which is very exciting. I'll note that the first stage of the process in doing the redeveloped plan was actually a survey of network members to get their thoughts on structure and the backbone and whether and how we want it to continue as a network, including one of the questions about whether VSJF should continue to serve as the backbone organization or whether it should move into state government. And we did hear through that survey that there's a lot of value in having it stewarded outside of government. So people were encouraging us to keep it as it was, and we're happy to have VSJF continue to be the backbone. So I know the focus of this conversation is on the network, not the plan, but I want to just acknowledge that our identity as a network is very much tied to the fact that we have this shared plan. So if I can just briefly say a little bit more about that and how the development of the plan itself was a network undertaking. It was a hugely collaborative effort. So on the new plan, we had over 52 authors, 111 contributors and reviewers, focus groups with over 100 producers, several hundred other network members, and over 1,000 responses to a public survey. So the new plan has 15 strategic goals and 34 priority strategies. And now that it's out, we really take a philosophy, like I said, of form follows function. So now that it's out, we're actually about to embark on an 8-month process of restructuring the network to make sure that it reflects the new plan and works even better for network members.
Thanks, Sarah. Definitely go more deeply into some of the things you lifted up shortly. But when people ask me about food system networks, actually networks in general, where, what's the tangible result they get to, I often point them to Farm to Plate, just in terms of what numerically you're able to lift up in terms of jobs added to the agricultural economy, the strategic plan with really tangible targeted goals. We know, of course, that life within a network is not always so linear and predictable, but real progress being made over the last 10 years. So thanks for being here. And Brett, you want to do the same?
Yeah, thank you, Curtis. And good to see everybody. Great to be here. I want to start just by offering major amounts of gratitude for the crew, the team of women from Mississippi who began the day for us. I'm feeling really inspired and humbled to even be sharing our story. I feel like giving more space to just hear more about Mississippi. This is what I'm feeling. But yeah, Noelle and just everybody just really, really felt it. So thank you. Okay, so I'm with NAMA. We've been around as a nonprofit organization for about 20 years. We center a lot of our work around network. Our mission is, we refer to ourselves as a movement building organization led by fishing folks, building healthy fisheries and fishing communities. And we do that a lot of ways. We focus on policy change and shifting markets that impact fisheries. And about 12 years ago, we started a network called the Fish Locally Collaborative. The Fish Locally Collaborative, we call it a decentralized network. We have about 500 individuals and organizations and even sub networks that are under that umbrella of the Fish Locally Collaborative, and it spans East Coast, Gulf, West Coast, Great Lakes, rivers, and increasingly international folks, all centered around common set of values. I really appreciated just all the acknowledgement of how important values are to network building from before. So I can maybe expand on that a little bit. A couple other things to note is that born out of the Fish Locally Collaborative, a couple of networks to highlight. One is the Local Catch Network, where NAMA has kind of helped serve as a backbone first to the Fish Locally Collaborative, but then of this outgrowth, the Local Catch Network being one of them, has also been around for about 10 years. And at this point has its own website, its own kind of steering committee, its own resources that are being developed. If you just learn about Local Catch Network, you may not even see NAMA or the Fish Locally Collaborative. And we kind of see that as a sign of our success, to the extent that we can kind of be invisible while these offshoots of our network grow and evolve, that we really see that as an important part of our work. So it's a little bit of like the internal role that NAMA plays. We serve as a backbone to a couple of different like networks, but then we're also part of a lot of networks ourselves. We're part of FSNE. We're part of the Heal Food Alliance. Hopefully Jose will figure it out and join us pretty soon. And we you know, even part of the reason why networks are so important to us, because we recognize that the problems that we face in fishing communities are so much bigger than ourselves. And we essentially have to network and find kind of common ground and reach others. For us, that especially means farming and agriculture communities. We're part of networks like the National Family Farm Coalition. It also means connecting with others who are lifting up like local and regional economies. We're part of networks like the New Economy Coalition. And then we're also part of a couple international networks, recognizing that the forces, problems that we're seeing here are global in nature. And we're part of a global-wide network called the World Forum of Fisher Peoples. The last thing that I'll say is just that our approach to network, I think our director, Niaz Dori, uses this great term that as a small organization building a big network, we're not trying to build an empire, we're trying to build a movement. And I think that speaks to how we see our role within networks. It's really about decentralizing ourselves as an organization and building leadership and capacity as far and wide as we can is really at the heart of the work and why we do it. So I'll leave it at that. Back to you, Curtis.
Thanks, Brett, and thanks, Sarah. Just an update. We are trying to reach Jose, and we hope he's okay. That we're working behind the scenes and hope that he will be able to join us. But we're gonna move forward with this New England exclusive conversation, at least for right now. So, you know, conversation in the first half of this with our guests from Mississippi who are still here, we were talking about structure and the primacy of relationship and trust is sitting at the heart of the structure. And you know, all the networks I know and have worked with, Farm to Plate has one of the most elaborate, shall we say, structures, which seems necessary given what you all have taken on in partnering with the state to carry out this robust strategic plan. How does that work, Sarah? How does that structure work as a network that doesn't get sort of bogged down in bureaucracy and those things that often networks are trying to work around?
Yeah, so as I mentioned briefly, we have about 11 to 12 permanent groups that meet quarterly. Some things that we tried in the first iteration of the network, to be honest, it didn't work. So I now say 11 to 12 groups. Originally, we actually had 5 working groups and 6 cross-cutting teams that were supposed to interface with all of the working groups, and that really didn't work for a number of reasons. So definitely experimentation and adapting the structure. And Not everything's going to work. One thing that I think does really work by the structure is having that, once we lump those two types of groups together, having those groups that spin off task forces, once it comes time to commit to project work, I think has been a really effective tool for several reasons, but one of the main ones is that it allows our members to engage in different ways and at different levels of commitment, depending on what works for them. So we want to make sure we have these project teams that are able to keep work moving forward, but we also don't want that to be the only way people are able to engage in the network. Not everyone is interested in those projects or able to dedicate the time between meetings. So the permanent groups sort of serve as a entry point that are always being more open and looking to bring new people in, and then sort of the action arm within them, I think, has worked really well. Another key piece of making it all work together is that communication between those 11 or 12 different groups to make sure that they actually know what each other are working on, so that truly is a network instead of 11 or 12 mini networks. And a lot of that, it really is relationship building. We've tried a number of different logistical tools over the years, some communications tools that didn't work out just because it was an unrealistic ask in terms of capacity. But the successful aspects of it have been the relationship. So myself and my colleague Jake co-coordinate the network. So I'm the point person for half of the groups and he's the point person for the other half. So he and I are constantly trying to keep each other updated on what the groups are doing so that we can serve as that point of connection between the groups. Our steering committee, I know some people were interested in different steering committee structures earlier on. Our steering committee has some ex officio seats, but the bulk of the steering committee is the chairs of each of those groups. So that's another really important point of contact so the groups can stay in touch with each other.
Right, and so just
what you were asking, Curtis.
Yeah, no, and I know there's, and also just highlighting the fact that you said there are two of you, right, engaged in coordinating this, and so you've got a staff that's running around and making a lot of this happen. Can you say a little bit more about your day-to-day work as a coordinator in this network to make it happen? Because it doesn't just happen by itself, right?
Yeah, and I think it really is important for the network to be successful to have adequate staff capacity, and we actually, and I feel bad that I didn't remember him at first. We've actually, one of our other coworkers who had been he is our communications manager for the Farm to Plate Network, has actually taken on hosting of some of the groups too. So we actually have 3 of us doing a network now. And if Shane ever sees this, I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier. So I do really want to emphasize how much time it is, and that's because it is relationship building. A lot of the day-to-day, especially before we started this plan update, was spent in maintaining our relationships and making sure we have open flows of communication with all of our network members. Often my day would be talking to a network member, not even the chair of a group, just an active member on the phone for an hour or two to update them on what was going on, hear their thoughts on other groups that they're not necessarily in. And I think that's a really important piece of it too, when you think about the reality of these network members who have limited time, even if they're at an organization, the organization's mission is so limited that they might only be able to send staff people to one group and not be able to justify sending them to a different topic area. But that person still has extremely valuable insight in that other group, and that one-on-one conversations is the way to get around that and make sure that they're really at the table for all of those conversations, have a voice in all of those processes.
Right, so lots of connecting, coordinating, weaving, tending behind the scenes. Yeah, lots of work that goes on there in the coordination role. Brett, I want to ask you a similar question. You have a different kind of structure. You've mentioned decentralization as kind of a way that you approach the networks that you're a part of. What is key to making that network function well?
I laugh, the word function. Just gonna chuckle at him. I wanted to say also to something that really resonated earlier that Noelle brought up also, is like this concept of even like representing a network. And as we think about like decentralizing networks, I think about avoiding that sort of top-down spokesperson style, like on behalf of this huge organic network, that there's like facets of the network that I don't even know of. Like I don't fully know, which is great. But at the same time, I really am sensitive and sometimes fear, like finding myself in those positions of like speaking on behalf of, and carrying that weight, and I think the weight and complexity of the struggle, as Noelle put it, like I'm feeling that. So anyway, but we do our best, we put it out there, and that's an important aspect of connecting. Like someone has to talk about it. So, but anyway, yeah. So for our structure, I think what stands out to me is that over the years of building our network, the structure has not been static, and it's never been like a linear path toward like more structure. We've had moments where there was like an intense need from structure that we were hearing from our communities, and then it was too much, and then we kind of let go. And it's been kind of evolving between, or vacillating between more structure and less structure over time. But just to give you a sense of the basics, I mean, our network has a listserv, an email listserv that we rely pretty heavily on. That's one of the primary ways for connectivity. We use a Google Doc system. We rely on that heavily, and recognizing that there's all kinds of problems with Google in general, but a lot of folks that we work with use it. It's working for us right now. And then what else helps us with structure? We have what might be called an oversight team, or we should call it a structure team. It's sort of our folks at the core who hold center, who hold the facilitation, who hold the values and accountability around the values. We have a team that is anywhere between like 6 to 10 people, making sure that the folks on that team represent who's actually in the network. And then at any given time, we have other like team, we use the word team a lot, other teams that are working together, as Curtis put, working to accomplish together what otherwise they couldn't do alone. We use those phrases a lot, knowing that like not every problem requires a network or a team, right? If you're going to change a light bulb, you don't need a network. But for a lot of the problems that we're talking about, especially white supremacy, the problems associated with capitalism, patriarchy, like these things that have been here for centuries, that are manifesting themselves in our communities, are so deep and complex that we really feel like the network and movement building approach is so required. And then what else to mention? I think one other thing to mention about our structure is just there's maybe a core like philosophical approach that we take. I know that the Interactive Institute for Social Change has shared this quite a bit, but it's like its basic pyramid for like building network power. And at the base of the pyramid is connectivity. In the middle of the pyramid is alignment. And at the very top of the pyramid is action, right? And if our connectivity isn't robust in the base, then we're never going to really be able to get to that alignment. And if alignment's not there, we won't get to action. So we actually spend a lot of our structured time thinking about how do we just increase our connectivity. If our folks aren't connecting to each other like really, really well and frequently, then none of the other stuff is really going to last for very long or carry much weight. And then in that middle space too, that alignment around core values and vision, where I kind of see that like that moving at the speed of trust, that phrase coined by the Movement for Black Lives, that's really core. So we're evolving as we go. I've always thought that the email listserv is not always the best, because not everyone uses it. But I'm also seeing that now with so much virtual gathering happening, it's also opening up new opportunities for connectivity like we haven't seen, especially as we do this like not East Coast to West Coast at Gulf kind of work. Back to you.
Thanks, Brett. Karen.
So I'm hearing this. I'm so glad you all are here. I don't get to see you very often anymore. So it's great to see your faces. And we're talking about networks, and we're talking about the connectivity. We're talking about the intersectionality about that. And Brett, I love it, in terms of your networks, and our network at FS&E, food and farm are connected. So I'd love to know how both of you, Sarah, how you're connecting more to farm, fisheries, and Brett to farm. But I also am thinking about, that we're all moving at the speed of trust around racial equity in our work. So how does that threaded through your network? How are you building your skill, your will, and that love to be able to move with that and into that and serving that? So those are two questions that I'd love for you to answer. Brett.
Oh man, all right. Those are big ones. Let's see how concise I'll get. I'll scratch the surface and go from there. Okay, so the farm and fish connection is just so core to the work that NAMA does. And I kind of mentioned that before. A lot of our initial impetus for building our network was recognizing that we can't do this alone and we need to reach out to folks where we share common ground. And it was pretty clear that the farming community was just such a natural ally to fishing communities, where both the history and the experience of family farmers is just there's so much overlap and parallel. And yet there's often so much disconnect that happens between farming and fishing communities. And it shows up quite a bit in the food system, as Curtis acknowledged. A lot of NAMA's work is hey, don't forget about the fish and seafood. We've been doing that for a while, and I think it's got us pretty far. So yeah, it's as an organization, it's even led to a kind of unique shared leadership model where we've literally joined forces with the National Family Farm Coalition, where our director and a couple other of our staff are literally sharing roles between NAMA as an organization and the National Family Farm Coalition. So it's sort of an experiment. We're about in the third year of it. But the intent is to literally straight up share resources and cross-pollinate all our own learnings and our shortcomings and our power together with the two groups. And maybe one just really specific and concrete thing that's happened recently. We had a little victory around genetically engineered salmon, where the first ever genetically engineered animal is about to hit retail markets in the US, pioneered by this group, corporation called Aqua Bounty. Aqua Bounty's primary markets are the big three food service companies, Sodexo, Aramark, and Compass Group. And so here's a victory. We just got Aramark to commit to boycott Aqua Bounty's genetically engineered salmon. And I say we, NAMA way in the back, but really it was a lot of tribes, indigenous leaders in the Pacific Northwest, and salmon protectors who've been working on this for over a decade. Student activists through Uprooted and Rising played a huge role. Global Alliance or Community Alliance for Global Justice, Friends of the Earth, and just a really awesome convergence of folks. But one really cool thing was that along the way, in trying to do the education and tell a story about the impact of genetically engineered salmon, which is on the fishing side, one of the primary feeds for aquaculture in general, but salmon in particular, soybeans. Right, so it's this very direct. Soybean farms are feeding into the industrial scale aquaculture spaces. And one of the largest lobbying groups for this new national federal bill called the Aqua Act is being championed, or the lead lobby group is Cargill. The lead lobby group for aquaculture policy is Cargill, because of the impact of farms and soybeans in particular. But anyway, so we were able to bring out some stories of soybean farmers through our partnerships to explain what's happening to the impact that soybeans are having on farming communities. And this is one small example of we're bringing stories of farmers into fishing spaces to leverage power and push for some policy change. So that's part one to Karen's question. I'll try and do the racial equity piece like quick, although it deserves so much more attention, and then kick it back to Sarah. So yeah, racial equity, I think our approach has been to just like really go deep internally, like starting with us as an organization, as NAMA, and looking at our own like leadership, our staff, our board, who's core to our leadership and our network, and taking the time to really do the analysis and do the hard work and build the trust and get uncomfortable. And as myself as a white, able-bodied male, embodying so many aspects of privilege, I kind of see a sign of my own journey is the level of discomfort that I have along the way. Like if I'm getting comfortable, like something's wrong. But practically speaking, we've done some trainings. Karen has offered some racial equity and analysis trainings for our staff and our board. That's been really helpful. So I think just emphasizing that like for us, it just really starts by looking at our own selves first, and letting that lead by example as we continue like looking for opportunities to infuse our own core values around racial equity, addressing white supremacy throughout our network. And one thing that came up, this is the last thing I'll say. One thing that came up earlier in the morning was this concept of losing folks along the way. And that's certainly been part of our journey as NAMA. I think every time that we have a newsletter that like uses the word racial equity or white supremacy, like we lose folks, and we get angry emails back at us. So we'll probably lose folks for me being on this thing today. But that's the journey, right? And we don't want to apologize for that, but at the same time, we want to find that sweet spot where we do want the folks, especially white folks, to have some level of discomfort, but not so much that pushes them kind of completely away. So that's part of our own like learning curve of like knowing our communities well enough that we can use the right language that meets them where they're at and helps actually empower them to move along like the marathon of racial equity.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it is. You do lose people when you stand firm on racial equity. And I always believe, and we've experienced that ourselves as FSNE, that you make that commitment. And when people are ready, when they are able, because we can experience that now from our first 21-day racial equity challenge posting 6 years ago, the number of people that participated this year, I think, Lisa, over 8,000 individuals. We started out with 200. So when we first started this, it's like, well, why, what? Sustainability, what does that have to do with racial equity? And 2020, we had many, many more leaning in, understanding, wanting more, learning more in community around it. So it's sometimes we just have to keep doing what we're doing till they catch up. So Sarah, please share a little bit about the racial equity piece, and then how are you all moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so we need to do a lot better on racial equity, and we're working on it, but we have a long way to go. For the Farm to Plate Network, racial equity has always been something that we have expressed as a value of the network, but we have historically struggled to actually operationalize that in the network. So that's a big piece of what we're working on. I think that question of how it's operationalized is something that is very specific to, I mean, every network is a little bit different, and that question of how do you actually take action on racial equity will look different in different situations. So in our case, because of our identity that's really tied to this strategic plan and our focus on action, one of the things we've really been wrestling with and don't have perfect answer to yet, is how do we ensure that racial equity is a consideration in all of our groups rather than ending up as a silo. So I referenced in my introduction that we sort of had this not very successful experiment with cross-cutting groups. And at first glance, I think there's a lot of arguments for racial equity is a cross-cutting topic. It's something that all groups should be thinking about. But historically in our network, we know that having something framed as a cross-cutting topic hasn't really worked as a way of integrating it into all of the other work, if that makes sense. So what we're thinking about as we redesign the network structure is what is the best mechanism to make sure all of the groups are working on it, rather than setting up a system that allows people to think of it as a silo in a separate group. Like, that's not for our group to work on. So that's something we are thinking through as part of this 8-month process. I will add, I think that is that's like the big picture of the work. And as everyone has said, it moves at the speed of trust. I do think it's also important to look at the minor things as well and be constantly vigilant about what we're putting out into the world. Last year, or it might have been 2019, we did a thorough review of past farm to plate materials. And we discovered that we had been promoting a career guide that profiled employees in Vermont's food system, and every single one of them was white, and that's not acceptable. So I think it's a balance of thinking of the long-term relationship building, moving at the speed of trust, and also in the meantime, look at all of the little things too and do better.
So Sarah, before we go on to another question, Curtis, the piece there about your connection with fisheries, do you make that connection as well, intentionally?
So we have a small aquaculture industry in Vermont, and I don't want to erase them. We do have an aquaculture industry in Lake Champlain. The extent to which we talk about fisheries as an industry is mostly about partnerships with other New England states, which I think does raise a really interesting question of, like, what is the appropriate geographic scale at which to do network work and food systems work. I think there's a ton of value in state level work, because that's how our government is set up in so many ways. But that coordination with other neighboring states is so important too. And for the fisheries example specifically, I think a lot about how, in Vermont, we talk a lot about export markets and New England feeding New England, and how do we get Massachusetts consumers to buy more Vermont dairy, because that's the bulk of what we produce. And the flip side of that needs to also be, how do we support Vermonters in purchasing their seafood from Massachusetts? And that's where the connections between the states and the New England-wide or regional-wide networks like FSNA and NAMA are so important.
Sure, thank you. So you and barter in harmony and connection here with farm and fish and sourcing as well. So thank you so much. Curtis.
Yeah, I want to jump in and formally welcome Jose. Thank you for joining us, and sorry about the confusion. We're just glad that you found your way here, or we found you. And we're into a conversation about our networks represented here, and have touched on structure and also equity. Before we go any deeper in the conversation, I'd invited Sarah and Brett to say just a little bit more about their networks as networks. I wanted to do the same for you, Jose, to introduce the HEAL Alliance.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and I'm so sorry that I'm so late. I don't know how the calendar invite ended up a whole hour after. It must be a time zone issue, but my apologies anyways. So I'm Jose Oliva. I'm the campaigns director for the HEAL Food Alliance. HEAL is a national alliance composed of about 55 groups. I say about because there's a handful of groups that are in the process right now of joining. And HEAL is an acronym. It stands for Health, Environment, Agriculture, and Labor. And when we first started sort of dreaming up what HEAL was going to be, the real drive for us and where we were coming from was that there were not very many spaces that were led by the Black, Indigenous people of color that were national networks, and that we're actually driving both the conversation around what the food system ought to look like, and that could actually identify specific sort of fulcrums, pivot points, if you will, that we could use, like campaigns or political education. We convened it together. I was at Food Chain Workers Alliance at the time. So there were 4 other organizations that convened it with us. The National Black Food Justice Alliance was one of them, Union of Concerned Scientists, the Real Food Generation folks. And we all had this, one common vision that we wanted to make sure that, first of all, that there weren't these siloed conversations about food and how food affects the human body in one silo vis-a-vis nutrition and health, and then a whole nother conversation about how food production and food waste impacts the environment and climate change, and another silo, and then a separate silo for workers, where how workers are impacted and impacting the food system, and so forth, right? That each one of these sectors were sort of a silo in and of themselves, and that we knew that no way that we were going to be able to solve the problems that the food system had created, and actually create a new food system if we weren't working cross-silo. And so that guiding vision is what led to the structure that we currently have. And I'll just say really briefly that the structure is really a co-responsive structure. The idea is that we have a leadership council that we call a steering council, that is composed of sectors. So each of the 4 sectors that I mentioned identify folks from that sector and elect them to be on the steering council. And that steering council serves both as sort of a board of directors of a regular organization, but it also provides guidance on overall movement leadership, right? So we see the work of HEAL falling into 3 realms of society. One is the micro, where the individual is the actor, and we have a school of political leadership for bringing in leaders and helping them connect with each other and develop skills and processes that they could use back home in their work. And that the actors in that situation, the individuals, are all part of the second realm, which is the meso, right? And that's the actor there are organizations, and the impact that we're trying to create there is institutional change. And that the way that we're going to do that is through campaigns and through identifying levers and fulcrums in those specific institutions, right? And then the third realm, the big one, is society as a whole, right? And the way that we're going to change that is through movement. And movement is not something that any one organization can create, right? Or individual. It really does take not just many organizations, but society as a whole, right? It really takes all of us to be able to create movement and make the changes that we need to make at the societal level. And so that's why the steering council is organized the way that it's organized, because we're not looking at them just as a sort of regular board of directors that are telling the organization how to function, but really as movement leaders that are guiding the overall direction of our movement. And then obviously we have staff that are sort of executing the direction that our leaders in the steering council put forth. And that direction is something that isn't just, it's not like a political line, right? It's not like, hey, we're going to do this thing and that's where we're headed. But there's an iterative process, both internally with HEAL member organizations and externally with other movement partners and movement actors. So yeah, that's sort of a quick rundown of how we're structured and why we're structured the way we are. I hope that answers the question. And again, I'm sorry that I'm late and missed everybody else.
Well, sorry for any confusion we may have caused. Just glad that you're here. That was great. Thank you. Very helpful to hear about the structure. And Jose, earlier in the morning, Noel, Didla, and others from Mississippi, many of whom are still with us, talked about structure as residing not just in sort of formal structures, but in things like trust and relationship and values. And I want to ask all three of you this question about how you can remain centered in values, right? It seems like it's the kind of question of our times where if, you're not 100% with us, then you're against us, or the polarization, or, when you bring diverse people together, what is it that bonds them together? So you just talked about, Jose, you can't control the movement, and yet ideally the movement's taking you in the same general direction in terms of values. Sarah, Vermont Farm to Plate is trying to work with the dairy industry, right? Which might be viewed by some as being, not to make it monolithic, but maybe more conservative perhaps, and others who may have more conventional views of agriculture. And then Brett, you've talked about decentralization as being an approach, and yet how do you contain that? How do you maintain a focus on values, mission? So it comes back to this alignment question and how you navigate that. So whoever wants to take that first, would love to hear all three of you speak to it.
Well, since I just spoke, I'll keep going and then I'll shut up. So in terms of alignment, we spent actually almost 2 full years before we launched HEAL, putting together what we now call the Real Food Platform, which is a platform that operates at the local, the regional, and the federal level. And it is values-based, right? So it's really looking at 3 major pieces of how food impacts our world, the economy, our health, and the environment. And each one of those sections it's a total of 10 planks in the platform. And that process, the reason that it took so long is because that was our alignment process, where we needed to understand what folks were doing on the ground to address the issues that were impacting frontline communities, and especially in Black, Indigenous, people of color led spaces. What were they doing? What were the innovations and actual work on the ground that was happening? And we took that and sort of paired it, if you will, with what other organizations were doing in a similar space, but in different geographies, or in similar geographies with different space, different sector, right? And that's how we came up with the platform. And the platform is sort of our horizon, right? It's what we're working towards. We know that there's a difference between the pragmatic, realistic things that we can get done now, and our platform, right, which is much more visionary and pointing in the direction of where we want to go. So that difference is where we operate, right? Like we operate in trying to shift both the narrative in mainstream society, so that impossible, which is our platform right now, and not everything in our platform is impossible, right? But certainly a huge chunk of it is. But in order for us to get there, we need to shift both the narrative, the cultural narrative of what is necessary and possible, and we have to shift the real political conditions, right? Which is why we have the School of Political Leadership, which means we need to have our people elected. We need to make sure that the folks who are elected are educated and that are moving in the direction of the platform that we put together.
Thanks, Jose. Sarah, Brett, maintaining alignment, values, focus amidst diversity or conflict.
Yeah. I jotted a few things down while you're asking the question. I'll see if I can read them. I think, so in terms of Farm to Plate, to some extent, again, it does come back to the plan. And in the new plan, we have several different levels of elements within that plan, right? So we have a shared vision, and then we have goals, and then we have strategies. And I think that's relevant to this question because disagreement between network members is the acceptability and appropriateness of that differs among those different levels. So we're never going to have full consensus on which of those strategies is going to be effective or is the most worth pursuing, right? And then at the goals level where we have 15, we probably aren't going to have consensus on which of those should be a priority. It's not even something that we should be doing, is trying to prioritize between those 15. That's why we have so many of them. But we want to make sure all of our network members support all of them, even if they don't necessarily agree with which one they would be working on right away. And then that vision piece is where that really is our identity as a network, and that's where we expect network members to share the same values. And like someone mentioned earlier, it's a matter of staying true to that, and you will lose people. A lot of people mentioned that you'll lose people, but that's that level at which you let that go. I think the other thing I thought of in terms of that middle level of goals, where people might have shared values and support all of them, but have different prioritizations or skill sets or work missions, etc. The network is also a really good way to hold ourselves accountable to avoid unintended consequences. So if we have a network where folks agree on those goals, the network can be a way of making sure that advancing one goal isn't to the detriment of another one. So it can also serve as a tool for making sure those who do have the same values are actually not exacerbating problems that they don't want to be exacerbating.
Thanks, Sarah. Brett?
So as NAMA, we've been part of multiple like value setting processes. We've done it with our Fish Locally collaborative. We've been part of it with our local catch network. We've been part of it with the budding Slow Fish network, an extension of Slow Food. And like Jose said, it's been a lengthy process for us each time, anywhere between 1 to 2 years. Each has involved multiple engagements with the network, whether we're using surveys or in-person gatherings as an opportunity to build shared analysis and go deep with where our values are. Team structures to help lead the process along the way over those 2 years or a year, 2 years. Sharing it back with the network, getting feedback, and then having some kind of way to reflect back to the network. Like, these are our core values. This is the anchoring point that's going to be the glue for our network. And I've learned over time that when those values are not in place or they're not clear, that's the most destructive, internally and destructive thing for a network. If I've ever been in touch with someone in our network who I thought I think this would be really great, we want to lift up your work, there's so much synergy going on, what's going on? And if that person is not engaging in the network, almost always it's because they'll say something like, I don't trust other people who I see in the network. I don't think that they're aligned with my vision and values. And so the response always to that is to get more clear, on the vision and values, and have levels of accountability back to those values throughout the network. So we've focused a lot of our attention on how to do that, ways that it shows up in our networks. The first being an orientation, that as folks enter the network, we make sure that there's an understanding and some kind of agreement that yes, I align myself with these values. And that's the primary entry way to join the networks that we're part of. We don't have much in terms of what's required to be part of the network, other than a very thoughtful way to say, I align myself with these values. I will be accountable to these values, and I enter this network knowing that they'll hold me accountable to these values. So that's a big one. And then at every step of the way, as our networks stay connected, if it's a gathering or over email, we have regular ways to just keep referencing those values and how they're showing up, and center our communication strategies around them constantly. So that's a big part. And then I think one of the most challenging aspects of network building I've found in the work that we do is the accountability piece, especially as we're trying to build something that's more decentralized, where NAMA is not dictating who's in, who's out here, but we're lifting up and building lots of different collaborations throughout, that inevitably folks will get in there who have ulterior motives, who do not align with our core values. And so what happens then? And how do you handle those moments of conflict? I think Noelle brought this up earlier too, just like those moments of how we handle conflict is so important. And it says a lot, you know, about who we are, and doing it in a way that's not, you know, furthering that white supremacy culture that was also referenced earlier. How do we, you know, handle conflict in a way that's, you know, we're not making folks catering to their need to feel comfortable, but we're able to be honest and real and do it with love and compassion. So we strive for that. We've had ups and downs, but one just very practical way that we do try to hold accountability in those networks is we have a team of folks who's are dedicated specifically for that purpose. We call it conflict resolution, or it has a couple of different names of the team in the different networks. But basically they're there so that if anyone in the network feels like values are being co-opted or abused, they can go to this team and like raise a flag. And then the team has, we have like this all like laid out, like the team's job is to follow a process and a protocol. And it's kind of like to listen, you know, to listen and understand the problem is being flagged. If somebody's being accused of violating the values, to actually address it, like have some kind of like conversation with that person and understand where they're coming from, and kind of like do a mediation process. It doesn't always, it's not perfect, it's messy sometimes. I've been told off a couple times and like attempting to be in that space. But that's what exists right now. And I think it's one of our biggest learning curves for how to like continue evolving that and how to avoid being that like policing agency. We hear that a lot from within our network. We don't want to be policing the network or perceived as like this authoritative group that's actually going to stifle collaboration and team building. But yet we still want to have accountability and build that trust, because if we're losing that trust, nothing else is going to work. And where we've arrived in that conversation is this concept we call community accountability. And that we know it's like, yes, we have this team that's for conflict resolution, but it's not going to rely just on that team. We need everybody. We need to build this culture of accountability throughout. And that gets tough too, because we don't want to do that call out culture. We don't want people going off the rails, like calling people out, like you're violating this value, you're violating this value. And that's the struggle. Like, how do we create that community accountability, but do it from a place of love, rather than like egotistically calling people out? So we're struggling. We have a lot of shortcomings along the way, but that's one of our, like, I think, biggest like growing curves as a network.
Noelle, I know you're not formally in this, but I'm wondering to build the bridge back to you know, the first 2 hours and what you put in the chat around transformative justice. Anything you want to say on that front?
Yeah, real quickly. Hey, Jose. And yes, transformative justice is a big lens that we are learning to use as a way to engage in principled struggle with one another while we are when we address conflict. Our purpose is to be able to transform ourselves and move beyond the conflict into a transformative place of understanding with a commitment to growing together, right? So how do we center our healing and wellness at the core? So unity, debate, unity is kind of like the process that we engage in, and we had to do that early on in our leadership process, which is the fellowship process, and we constantly have to do that in the collaborative space. Absolutely have to do that in the Mississippi Food Policy Council space. So I just wanted to say these are things we are learning from multiple spaces and self-determining in ways it applies to the context of the communities that we are working with in the collaborative, in the policy council, and also in the fellowship spaces. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Noelle. So I think, Lisa, we're going to go into some small groups just so people can digest a little bit, connect with new people for about 12 minutes, and then we'll come back and field questions from those who are still with us.
Okay, here we go.
And I hope it's okay to do this, but I just want to say I love seeing the fact that there are members of other networks that our foundation here. That's an amazing work.
Oh, we're losing your audio a little bit, Curtis.
Oh, it must have. All right.
And I think everyone's back.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. So I think what we were calling the last segment is our course. So we've been from core to course and mingling them back and forth. So really would love to know what questions or what came up in your time together, reflecting on the last chorus, but as well as the entire chord and the entire concert. What's coming up? You can drop them in the chat. And I can see the chat, hopefully. Questions, comments, what are you holding on to? What are you exploring beyond?
Karen, I had one question come over to me, and maybe I can say that I put it in the chat a little earlier, but others should feel free to throw their questions in as well. The question had to do with like balancing that tension between the time it takes to go at the speed of trust and do some of these relationship processes without which we can't do some of our work, and like the tension between that and the urgency that a lot of people feel, whether it's because of, white supremacist culture and the real harm and damage that's happening, climate change, like all of these feelings of urgency, which is also a white cultural norm, urgency. But like, how do your networks, maybe Sarah, Jose, Brett, hold, like, how do you grapple with that tension? I guess we're all kind of in that soup together. Maybe Jose, you could, if you have any thoughts on that.
It's a really good question. My formula for that is that urgency has to come from the grassroots. If people are feeling urgent about something, right, then it's urgent. If the executive director of a national nonprofit is feeling urgent about it, it's probably not as urgent. Not to say that they're not listening to their base, right? It might be that they're listening to their base and therefore it is real and urgent. But that's just how to discern, right? What is actually urgent and what is not. The second part of that is what do you do with that, right? So I think it's a common mistake that I've made, that I continue to make, to feel the urgency yourself and to want to run with it, right? Instead of understanding who all of the stakeholders are and developing a strategy around that, right? So that you're not leaving people out, or I've done this before where I unintentionally cut people out of something that I'm doing because I just didn't think of them in the moment, and not because I had a blind spot about them. It was simply the urgency that was driving me in that direction that didn't allow me to sort of take a step back and think about who all were the stakeholders in this particular situation.
Others, anything else that's percolating for you in terms of how you would respond to that question?
Yeah, I can go. I had two thoughts. First is that it's all happening simultaneously, and just going back to that pyramid that Brett laid out of the connectivity, action, alignment. I love that pyramid, and we use that too. But all of those phases are going to be always happening at the same time. I mean, the Farm to Plate Network is 10 years old at this point, and by 5 years in, people felt like, oh, we have alignment, we're moving into action. But even 5 years in, there's new people in the network, there's new people in those organizations. That connectivity is always going to be happening. So to some extent, managing that tension is a function of the network facilitators to just be able to handle both of those streams simultaneously, rather than an idea of switching from one to the other as appropriate. The other thought I had as an answer to that question is just recognizing when something isn't actually the network's role to play. And especially, like, this is something that will be different for every network. Farm to Plate is, as I've said, like, more focused on the strategic long-term planning. So this might not be true for every network, but for us, when things come up that are really urgent, it's not necessarily our role. There's probably organizations that are better suited to take that on, and we don't feel like we need to own everything. So sometimes if something comes up that's urgent, we can provide support if we have the resources to provide support, but not feel like we need to own that by switching to doing that instead of the longer term work.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, to build off of Sarah and Jose, I was going to go where Sarah just brought it to, that throughout our network, there's a constant flow of like fires that need to be put out, and it can show up, so there's a kind of fires that we as a network don't maybe need to put out, or or we don't need to centralize ourselves in that way, or to think that it's our network or our network's leadership's job to put out all the fires. But there's a role to be played to acknowledge the fires and do our best to connect where connections may not already be being made. So I think that's like the first threshold, just to ask the question, okay, see urgency, feel urgency, is it our job as network or network leadership to take that on? It's like a first pass. And then I think to get into how Karen framed it, but that white supremacy culture, or Lisa framed it, that white supremacy culture is like very real, with the urgency, and for white folks, and an aspect of the privilege, just feeling like there's a problem, my white savior, it's like brain warp telling me like I need to swoop in and solve this problem and do it with urgency. Like that shows up in our network a lot. And to be able to discern like the difference between like when that's happening and then there's just like genuine need to address an urgency is not always easy for us to see, but sometimes it is. And as like some of the core group or some of the leadership of the network, it's their job to call that out when it happens in a nurturing way, hopefully. And I think the last reflection I have on it too is just, I think a lot about that for myself and how it starts like with us as individuals. And for me, my own privilege, like I do have some of that too, as a white male, like being told that, yeah, like I need to save stuff and swoop in and fix problems. I need to really like keep myself, in check with that and understand like where my own urgencies are coming from and make sure that I don't insert that into our role within the network to be a backbone support and provide others, so that we can get to that place like where Jose brought up too, where like we need to make sure that the genuine and authentic urgency that's coming from our base and from the communities has space to be heard and not get usurped or overwhelmed by someone like the leadership and the urgency that I think we all feel too, because it is real and it's hard to be in this space and it's hard to see so many fires so often. So for me, it's like that constant practice of just addressing my own internal urgency and keeping that in check as we do the organizing work.
Thanks, Brad. So there was a question in here about, you mentioned this, Brad, earlier about you didn't want to be police. You didn't want to police around your norms or community agreements. Do any of you have any strategies on how you can not do that, but yet stay on course?
I am not sure I'm following the question. Policing what?
Oh, I'm sorry, Jose, you probably weren't here. So earlier, Brett was talking about how when we talk, yes, you were not, I'm sorry. When we're talking about racial equity at the core of our work, and how are we holding that and moving through and growing and building skill around that. in our networks. And what he shared is that oftentimes there's a feeling, you don't want to feel like you're policing and telling people to do this or calling them in too often. And so when you need to kind of hold them close into a different direction they're going, how do you do that? Do you have any techniques of pulling people in, understanding where you're going with your commitment for racial equity? And how do you deal with conflicts that may come up for a variety of reasons?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important question to address. I think it's pretty complicated in the sense that it is not just it's not just people of color calling out white folks when something happens that sort of moves the direction of the organization in a more rightward white supremacy direction. I think it's also a question of white folks calling each other out, and I think it's also organizational dynamics, where some organizations are culturally very white, even if they have people of color at the helm. And that those dynamics can get really complicated, right? And who gets to determine what organization is what, right? We at HEAL put together a group. Some of the folks on this call are in that group, called AWARE, which is an alliance of white something. It's white folks, basically. I'm sorry, I don't remember the acronym, but it's an acronym about how white folks can be allies to people of color. And it is a collection of both folks who are representing their organizations and folks who are not in positions of power in their organizations, either because their organizations are very large or because the organization isn't there yet, right? The leadership hasn't gotten to the place in their development, in their political development, to understand how white supremacy culture influences, impacts our work overall. But those folks are both developing a curriculum for new groups that join HEAL, right? So as a group joins HEAL, they will go through a process and a training, especially if they're white-led, right? That will actually help them understand what their commitment is going to be vis-a-vis Black, Indigenous, people of color led organizations. And it's also an action guide in terms of what do you do when X, right? So I think having processes in place and having systems in place to address this is really important. And I'm not in any way claiming that HEAL has figured it out, right? Like we are literally, cutting the grass in front of us as we're walking, right? And that is, I think, an invitation to all of you who want to share materials and who want to work together to build processes like this cross-organization.
Thanks, Jose. Thank you, because it is when you talk about cross organizations, we are building it as we go, and we're learning as we go, and recognizing that it is a journey, and that we will make those mistakes, but also having a way of being able to move past those, resolve those, and move forward. We talked about healing earlier. So always thinking about making sure we're healing after those hiccups and those challenges. Because I'm trying to see what might else be in the chat, and I'm having a difficult time. Do you see anything else in terms of questions that are coming up?
There's one question. I mean, there are a few different questions. It's one that's very personal about how each one of you stays grounded in your values. What are your own strategies, practices?
I can give it a shot. Great question. Well, a very practical way is I was really privileged and fortunate to take part in the Rockwood Leadership Institute's Art of Leadership. The Rockwood Leadership Institute is amazing. If folks haven't seen it before, I highly recommend. And they have a couple different like leadership groups and cohorts. And they also have like a daily practice scheduled. But the core of their like leadership philosophy is what they call leading from the inside out. That until like we on a personal level are in tune with our own purpose and keeping ourselves healthy and all the things that you can do, until we're doing that, we're not going to be very effective at anything else. So they have like just straight up like a list of daily practices that last throughout the year that touch upon like personal ecology, deepening your own connection to purpose, accountability, not overcommitting yourself. I think that's where we're at in the practice right now. Like not making promises that you don't keep. And then, even there's a whole thing too on like love and just being in touch with your love, and it's really good. So I rely on that, pretty heavily and reflect on my own purpose. I think that's the core of it though. It's like understanding your purpose and reflecting on it and deepening it, and changes as we go. But I think that's like the fuel to my engine. Yeah, this connection to purpose.
I would just add, I am really lucky to be at an organization with funders and be able to work this into my work plan. But we, as well as I was mentioning earlier, the sheer amount of time it takes to maintain relationships, there's also this element of leaving time for reading and education and inspiring yourself. And I have the ability as part of my workday to learn and explore new topics. And that I think is really important to help keep me grounded in why I do this. And part of that too, I would add, is not just being focused on reading and learning about things that are explicitly food system related, but also allowing myself to spend time reading and learning about related issues like affordable housing or transportation justice, that are really important to actually do food system work effectively, but are also reminders and a way of grounding myself in my values about why this work is important at all, as part of the bigger picture.
Jose, anything you'd add, and inviting others to answer that question as well? How do you stay grounded? How do you stay focused on what's most important, your values?
I'll let others answer. I talk too much anyways.
Noelle.
I don't think you talk too much. But...
No, not at all. Not at all. That's why you're here, to talk. That's why you have a mic, to talk.
Fair. All right, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, it's a lot of things. How I stay grounded. I think a lot of it just has to do with, and this is not to guilt anyone who is not rooted the way that I am, right? But I feel like I'm in this fight because of my history, because of my family, because of who I am. I was born in Guatemala and had to leave Guatemala because of a civil war that was fought for 36 years, that killed over 200,000 people as a result of a CIA coup that happened because there was a land redistribution program that was trying to give land to landless peasants. And some of that land belonged to Chiquita Banana. And Chiquita Banana, it was run by Edgar Allan Dulles, the brother of John Foster Dulles, the head of the CIA. And that triggered this civil war, right? And so to me, this is the rootedness and the groundedness is not, it comes easy to me. I don't know how else to say it, right? It is embedded in who I am to the level of DNA, I feel like, because I can go back to, the Europeans first arriving in this continent and destroying Guatemala and all of what happened, and how our food systems reacted and responded to that. So yeah, my personal theory is that we should all be doing work in our communities, right? We should all be doing work that impacts our communities, both because that's the people we want to affect, right? We want to make their lives better, but also because that's the people we know. That's how we know that we are actually having an impact, right? It's our community. And so to me, it's being rooted is about how you are being held accountable by your community.
Thank you, Jose. I think what we want to do with just 12 minutes and allowing ourselves the option to end even early is maybe just to do a final round of asking each of you to share anything you would like with people here who've attended, who are interested in the power of networks to realize food systems that are grounded in justice, sustainability for the communities that we care about, as Jose has lifted up. Would you leave us with a question, an invitation, a suggestion? And then I think Lisa will wrap us up.
So Curtis, you want to hear from each of the panelists one last time? Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Any parting remarks before we do our closeouts? Okay.
Oh, Jose, I saw the unmute.
We did it at the same time, so I wasn't sure who was going to do it. Sure, I'll start. I think, first of all, I want to say that bringing everyone together to have this conversation in and of itself is a real feat. And it feels, to me, it feels like the folks who are on this webinar are actually engaging as opposed to some other spaces that I've been in where it's, you don't know if people even care about what you're saying. So thank you all for being engaged and for being here. I think what I would want to say is two things. One, that as we continue to develop our work together all across the country, not just in the Northeast, but everywhere, that I think it's really important for all of us, especially in this time of this new administration, right, to start thinking about how these artificial silos that we've created for food can be broken down, right? And I know that that's difficult, especially when you're operating in the policy space, because policy is such a fickle thing, right? Where you write a code of law and that's impacting a very specific thing. But I think there's ways. I think, the good food purchasing policy, for instance, has demonstrated that there are ways of actually connecting all of these issues so that we are having a multi-sector impact rather than just thinking about, this one specific thing that maybe our organization is doing at the moment, right? So I would leave you with that, right? Let's try to think bigger. Let's try to think more ambitiously in the next 4 years, and let's definitely do away with these silos.
Thanks, Jose. How about Sarah?
I really appreciate that point, Jose. Thank you for that. And I also just really appreciate this whole event in general. There's so many amazing networks specific to food systems, not specific to food systems, and they're all constantly evolving, and there's so much we can all learn from each other. So I really love the opportunity to learn what everyone else is working on. I guess one last thought, which is more of a question, something we're still wrestling with, and just being conscious as we move forward in this networking work of striking the right balance between finding a shared identity and alignment, and how do you celebrate that and celebrate coming together as a network without becoming a clique and without becoming something that's impenetrable and harder for new people to enter. So that's like it's a question, but it's also it's not a question with a concrete answer. It's just a question for us all to be thinking about always as we move forward.
Thanks, Sarah. How to keep the network open, not close it, not close it. Yes. Brett?
Yeah, echoing the gratitude for FSNE for hosting this, and again to the team of Mississippi folks who led us through the morning and shared a lot of really powerful stories. I really appreciated it. I would like to leave the group with what is hopefully an inspiring image, and the image that relates to the power of networks. And the image is a starfish. There's this really great book about the power of networks. It's called The Spider and the Starfish. And it contrasts the two, where as a spider has a sort of like centralized brain and nervous system, but like with the 8 legs. And so if you attack, I don't like to use violent imagery, but if you attack a spider at the center, all the rest of it dies. Whereas a starfish, if you sever one of its arms or legs, it literally grows another starfish. And so like the more you attack a starfish, the stronger it actually gets. And so it draws this really strong parallel around how this kind of gets a bit to the white supremacy culture of some of the models that dominate our culture, right? Like military style, centralize the efforts similar to the spider. But one of the weaknesses is that there is a center, it is identifiable, and it controls the rest, which leaves it vulnerable. The starfish represents this decentralized sort of movement building aspect where it grows and evolves more organically. So I hold that image a lot for our work. I wanted to offer that to the group as like, something to think about when we think about the power of networks, and being that oftentimes networks, when attacked, can actually become stronger and more resilient and build more power. So, thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Noel, and our friends from Mississippi. We use that word friends now. We've been at this for a while. This is just a continuation of a long conversation that we hope will continue. And so very appreciative of all that you have brought today. For everybody who stuck with us or joined us midway. Yes, the recording will be available. And we hope that we'll continue to stay in touch in one form or another. Lisa, I wanted to turn it over to you for any other last bits of housekeeping, and then we'll end our time.
Thanks, Curtis. Yeah, just a few announcements and some gratitude. Wanted to remind everyone that the 7th 21-day Racial Equity Habit Building Challenge is coming up in April, and you can sign up for that on our website. We have an amazing planning team updating that program for this year. There's a new FSNE pledge. If you or your organization wants to sign on and become more embedded in this network that's emerging into more of a movement, feel free to sign on there. The network team is also recruiting for new members. Our partner network, Farm to Institution New England, is organizing a virtual summit for April, so do check that out. And also keep your eyes open for a network health assessment. It's sort of an online survey tool. It's not everyone's favorite thing, but it's one of the ways we want to start really supporting more people being involved in shaping the future of our network. So keep your eyes open for that. And of course, we have three more events in this series, subsequent Fridays in February. So please consider joining us. You'll get all the annoying emails from me, so you can register from those links that you'll get. And we'll be focusing on our other 3 impact areas for our network: racial equity, policy, and narrative strategy. And just loads of gratitude for those who make this series and our network efforts possible. Again, Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Foundation, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts Foundation, and the many other organizations that support our network. So I will close there with some enormous gratitude to each and every one of you who hung in there to the end, despite the reality of Zoom fatigue happening in this time in our lives. And just appreciating all you bring. If you haven't already, you'll be receiving a little something in your email asking you to think about one thing from today that maybe caused you to think differently about this work of networks for food system transformation. So if you can, click the link in that email and give us just one quick thought off the top of your head, we'd be enormously appreciative. So back to you, Curtis, for a final closing.
Final closing, which will be very, very brief, to go back to the wisdom of the poet, Marge Piercy, words we shared at the top of this session, way back 9 o'clock or so Eastern, without reading it all. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. You can't always tell by looking what's happening. So weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses, live a life you can endure, keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in. This is how we're going to live for a long time, not always, for every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, and we might add to that, trust building, leaning into values, the harvest comes. Thanks, everyone. Be well, stay safe, keep on keeping on, stay in touch, stay connected.